Geniuses, Alliance. People remember the first few seasons of LCS when it was EU LCS. And nowadays, streamer, I would say notorious Twitter arguer. I don't know what his title would be, but like, it's basically, if people don't know, by the way, that's ironically one of the reasons I actually want to do the show with Wickd, because I actually notice he has loads of good conversation starters on Twitter. It's just that most people on Twitter aren't really trying to have a conversation. So it's like, I always like see him going back and forth with people. And I'm always like, well, this would be interesting, but it never goes anywhere. So I thought, why don't we just do a fucking show then? We just talk about these topics directly. And then the guest for this particular episode is going to be amazing. Well, obviously, people will know I did a lot of my Thorin's rotation shows when we were doing the LEC stuff with. Used to be a jungler way back in the day, a whole bunch of teams. Actually, not even that long ago. We're only talking like two years ago or something now. He was playing in LCS still with 100 Thieves. And then there's obviously been a coach with Misfits since then. And now is like, and I notice now you're living as like influencer or something. What does that actually technically mean? What do you do for Misfits now?
Content creation. We're doing a couple of videos right now, and I'm like, we're trying to build the brand a bit, because now they kind of separated between Misfits, the American brand, and the EU brand. So they want to utilize me and my face to do that.
Okay. And also, by the way, another person who is notorious for making tweets that are super interesting and start conversations. And then what happens is about the first 2 or 3 replies are interesting, and then again, they just die off and they go nowhere. What do you think about that, actually, by the way, Wickd? Because I know it's, like, I'll bring it up jokingly, but I actually find it a bit frustrating, because I'm sure you must have a similar vibe. Like, you want to start a conversation or you make a point to people, but it doesn't seem like on Twitter it ever actually, like, you never really get the satisfying convo of it, right?
So I feel like Twitter nowadays is basically just firing out your opinions. And that's it. Like, it doesn't go anywhere ever, because the second somebody responds, it's very rarely that you can do constructive talks with people. There's a few people like Malik Clips from NA as a coach, and then Peter Doon. And then also talk to them in DMs, right? We have really good conversations back and forth.
Oh, that's
but
most
of them is just like, oh my God, I need to look good. I need to look good. What do I write to look good to the people? How do I take care of my brand and just keep looking good? Like, that's the number one thing, right? People want to look good in their responses, and they don't ever want to be wrong. So when you have a conversation, people are like, no, I cannot be wrong. So either they stop answering if they're 100% wrong, or they just keep being, they keep going no matter what.
I definitely know what you mean in that sense, because like it's weird, because you would actually think on stream discussions, like talk shows would be the one where everyone should be afraid of, like, what are people thinking? But if people don't know, when you do those, unless people actually have the Twitch chat up, it's easy to forget you're actually in front of an audience and you just have a convo with whoever's in the call. But I have actually noticed, I would agree with that. On Twitter, I even kind of feel like it in myself. When people talk to you, you are just constantly aware, though, that like everyone in theory is reading the replies in the conversation. So it does sort of like unduly influence how people argue, I notice. Because as you say, like, no one ever concedes anything on Twitter. On a talk show, you just concede something just to get into the point, don't you? Like, right, we'll accept this premise and here's how I'll argue against it. Like, people just talk past each other on Twitter, as far as I can tell. LS obviously is a classic example of that, but part of that is that's just kind of his brand, isn't it? Like, if he chooses which battles he wants to take, fair enough. Problem I have with that is goes like this, and this is where I do draw a line on everyone on the internet. It's like, just don't. I've got it mastered, right? If I don't want to have like a back and forth discussion, I just don't get involved in the Twitter conversation. I definitely don't like it, I will say, because there's one pet peeve I have, is don't jump in initially and have a couple of interesting back and forths and then be like, right, well, I don't want to discuss this stuff. It's like, well, why are you jumping in then? That's the one that does tilt me, boys, because like a lot of people like to get the first or second reply in, and then once they've kind of made their point, they just fuck off, don't they? There's no convo.
Yeah, that's pretty much what happens. But one thing I can say as well, back in the day when we were a streamer and we played on a team, me and CLG and so on, what we always did after games was we muted the voice, because nobody wanted to look bad. And if we noticed, if we had talks on voice while streaming, everyone was just like, I don't want to look bad, I did nothing wrong. And the conversation was completely useless when we tried to practice, right? So after every game, we muted and then we had our discussions. I just feel like people are very afraid of looking bad. And especially on Twitter, because it's a written platform, people have infinite time to make their tweets.
I mean, it's also way easier to just retweet and quote tweet something and actually like reach your own audience, right? Compared to making a YouTube video about someone having a different opinion than you, So it's like, it's a lot easier to make a different point and reach your audience and kind of have that like kind of like circle jerk that you have in there on Twitter than you have on any other platform. So it definitely encourages you to just like say one thing and make a bold statement, shit talk someone, whatever it is, make an answer they may not like, and then that's it,
Indeed, because as people would know, like I think those sorts of convos are just really great on shows if you have them. So we'll try and have some now. So if people don't know, I jokingly was telling these guys this, but it's actually true. One of the reasons I wanted to do the show with Wickd, for example, is even though a lot of his tweets, actually, I feel like a lot of your tweets that you do would play really well as content, which is why we're going to do it now. Because your tweets obviously come from the solo queue world as well as esports. So you're not just saying things related to esports people, and then people have a discussion about, like, freezing, like jungle rotation. You usually are also making your points about the champions in the game, which obviously is super popular with people who play the game. So what we've done is for this one is, just for the first one, we've basically just written down loads of things that these guys have argued about on Twitter, all the great conversation starters, and we'll just see which ones go anywhere. But I actually thought, bearing in mind the timing of when we're recording this, so we're recording this on Saturday evening, and this is basically when everyone's found out today this ridiculous news, like actually probably the biggest off-season, not even off-season, mid-season news probably ever, which is that there's all these role swaps in Europe to jungle. So everyone knows the big one was Bwipo, which actually seemed to actually go down fairly well on Reddit. Like, people seemed more annoyed by like what is Fnatic doing and what is like the Adam move. People didn't seem as annoyed by like Bwipo going to jungle. But the one from today is obviously the huge one, which is that SK Gaming is going to rotate out Tinks, who was like pretty hyped actually for people in this coming into the spring split. They're going to put Treats, their support player, in jungle, and then Jezzy is coming back to play support again, which obviously he did years and years ago when he was in Fnatic, but on this weird angle of like, I'm only doing this because the players are saying I want to do it, which is one of the weirdest angles of it itself. It's like, if you're the coach, man, you think you're good and you're better than them, just say that, but okay. So obviously the general topic here, Amazing, I know you had some very strong thoughts about this, is basically the implication from the teams in pro play, bearing in mind for all the other roles, top lane, mid lane, they're still looking for like super rookies in ERLs. They're still trying to find the next super talent. The implication here is people apparently think jungle's the easiest role.
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of what you took from it?
That's kind of what I took from it, because when you look at like how people are also honestly like interacting with my tweet, for example, right? When I talked about it, I said I do think that it's really bad for a lot of people that are trying to like get to the LEC, trying to get to that level. They kind of see suddenly that their role is not just being competed for by their jungle peers, but also by other players. So it definitely puts more and more rocks into their way, and it also kind of reflects really badly on the jungle role itself, because you're telling people it's so easy that anyone who wants to can suddenly role swap from other roles, whether it's top or support at this point, right, and make use of it. And I think that message is really, really difficult and complicated, because while I do think that the inherent like the difficulty of the jungle role has gone down over the years, like I think some of the individuality has been killed off, and I've been really vocal about that. I still think there's so many intrinsic things that you can't pick up within 1 or 2 weeks. And that's basically what they're expecting right now from a top and support player, respectively, which I completely disagree with.
So from my perspective, I've played a lot of Phil recently. I've actually played a ton of jungle as well, and it's going really well. Now, the thing is, jungle is ridiculously easy right now. I think anyone can pick it up instantly and be good at it. But the problem is, that's because people are playing Udia, Rumble, and Morgana, and these champions are super easy, right? But those champions are going to be nerfed, and once Elise, Kha'Zix, and actually difficult junglers comes back, people are going to have a much harder time, and they're going to shoot themselves in the foot, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the issue, but I also don't quite agree that it's like so easy right now to. I mean, if you, for example, come from support, obviously have some kind of prior knowledge on Morgana. Like if you come from top lane, you can meme about the volleyball knowledge, to a certain extent, but it's like. It's the jungle role in competitive, and I think that's what a lot of people get wrong right now. Like I think in solo queue it's a lot about just like going through the repetitions, which is why you have a lot of AFK junglers, honestly, like being at the top. Like we had this discussion way in the past with Mr. What's the other LS guy? The
Malice.
Malice, exactly, right?
Yes.
That people like this can actually like cycle through, but the thing is that. While this works for some time, and as you said, right, if a meta shift occurs, you suddenly have to relearn, and you have to kind of go back on prior knowledge. And I think that's where a lot of people are gonna, like, as you said, shoot themselves in the foot. But it's also like right now where the jungle role still requires you to kind of talk about certain things. What is your pathing? What is your matchup? How are the lane matchups? Like, when can we go for team fights? Like, it's a lot of accumulated knowledge over the years that I think you have to kind of bring into the game. And I don't think that someone who's, I think Bwipo is in a better state, way better state, honestly, because he's just a better player than Treats overall, than Treats is, because I think Treats, like, mechanically is not the same player that Bwipo is, and Treats is also not going to be the same, like, experienced player where he has experience winning at the highest level compared to Bwipo. and he can't bring any kind of prior knowledge into the role because he has no prior knowledge, right?
Sure. By the way, Wickd, when you said your answer, you kind of like sounded like you were relating it to your solo queue experience. Is there a distinction to be made? Like for example, if you say it's easy, like as in if you play in solo queue, maybe even at like a high level, is it the same for competitive though? You don't think for competitive there's a higher kind of like barrier to entry to be a pro jungler?
I think for competitive, it depends again on the season and so on, right? Like, as I said, once you get Elise and Kha'Zix back, it's going to be a lot harder. But right now, due to these champs being so simple and being rotation, like a super simple, you do bot into top, into crab, into base, into bot, into whatever you do generally, unless you see a free gank. And the ganks are generally called by your teammates, right? So it's very, very simple. I think right now, jungle is very related to the team. And the number one thing you need to do is communicate. And if you're able to communicate all the time, then I don't think it's that big of a problem mechanically. But I think the laners are what sets up the jungle. For example, if you look at MSI, we saw C9 with the famous Blabber crab, right? There's obviously miscommunication from top because Fudge wasn't able to push as he's supposed to in that matchup. And Blabber was like, what am I going to do now? I'm going to get double crab again. And then he just jumped in and took it and died.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand what you mean, but I think it's slightly more difficult than that. Like, I mean, obviously it's about communicating, but when you play the jungle, like, and I think that's like basically why I can't lane either, or like I struggle to lane unless I'm playing like with a support on my as my AD carry, you know. Then like I feel like you're always stuck in the position where you have to recalculate everything, right? Like instincts kind of take over when the conscious level of expertise becomes subconscious, right? That's when the instincts kick in, because that's basically the definition of instinct.
Sure.
I think people who are basically at like starting to learn jungle, they keep making conscious decisions. That doesn't mean that it's bad. Like that doesn't mean that it's bad. It can be that they make the right decision every single time, right? They make the right gank happen, they make the right play happen, the right dive happen. But it's when the pressure comes onto you and you actually have to you have to rely on some of the instinct and basically like have that be the ground level of you, is when these people are going to struggle. Like, for example, we've seen this, I think Blabber is maybe even a good example where I feel like a lot of his instincts actually were mismatched by what he saw on the map, right? To a certain extent. And a lot of the decision making was so influenced by the pressure he was facing that suddenly he had like a base level of instincts to come back to, but it was not sufficient enough. And I think that's what we're going to see with a lot of junglers that are going to like come from other roles where suddenly they have no instincts to come back on. They're going to be put under pressure by anyone that is going to put in skill check them to any certain extent. And suddenly they're going to be struggling because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to come back in certain situations because they haven't encountered them. They don't know how to push the lead to the high extent because they haven't encountered that situation. So it's always like, They don't know the very intrinsic things of jungle that like people have learned for years and years and years. And I think even if they make like 100 right choices, I think when it comes down to it and they are gonna face pressure, they're gonna be in really, really bad spots, even worse than Blabber was at MSI.
I agree with that. Also, one thing I want to note about jungling, I think jungle is one of the roles that's fully knowledge-based, or like mostly knowledge-based, right? So when you get into a matchup where you're actually supposed to be aggressive and invade, I think that's when people are going to struggle, because a lot of people just be like, okay, this is my standard pathing, this is what I do every time, I'm just going to go through the motion, but they're never going to see the opportunities where it's like, oh, I could invade right over here because he's a little bit slower than me, and then I can kill him, and we can snowball the entire game off that, right? So I think that's something we'll see massive problems with.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the thing I have as a problem with this is I kind of like... The weird thing is I'm torn on this issue, because on the one hand, like I actually think if you look at the history of role swaps, the most obvious roles to swap to are support and jungle, and it's for people who maybe they're not going to be the best later, but they have like a very good mind for the game or something like that, you know. So obviously these are the roles where like I don't hate the idea of like the swap as a concept. My problem is like the specific cases like this one. Like I agree on the traits one. Like mate, he's only just had the bloody redemption arc as a support player at the pro level, and now he's already going to swap over the other one, and that's I kind of alluded to. There's obviously the whole fucking can of worms of fuckery, which we might not get into, but it's sort of implied by the whole Jesus angle. Because as I say, that whole thing where he's sort of like, oh, I don't want to do this, guys, honest. Like, you know, the players want me to do it. It's like, mate, well, why are you doing who's the coach? You or the players? You obviously literally agree with it or had the idea in the first place. Like, there's no way the players come to you and go, oh, player, please, coach. And then you're like, but I don't actually think I should play. I better do it since you guys say so. That, in my opinion, you do that purposely to just cover yourself from any like accusations that you put yourself in. Essentially you did. And if you think it's the right move, by the way, just fucking own it. Just say I think it's the right move. And you know what? If you end up being right, then we'll all have to fucking praise you, won't we? And you have to get your credit that you deserve. So that's a whole separate topic on that one. But my issue with this is where I kind of like heavily agree with him is it's all well and good. Like I agree. basic concept of like, can anyone just sort of farm as a Udyr and probably be okay in a bunch of games? Yeah, probably. But my problem is there's two main factors here. One is like, first of all, like he says, any kind of a pressure situation, so like the playoffs, for example, like in my opinion, what actually ruins a lot of scenarios in games like League is that people, I actually think, by the way, this is what happens to like teams like Cloud9 at MSI. What happens is they actually start like thinking consciously about the game. Like they start thinking, oh fuck, this is all going wrong. And they're trying to just like in the split second come up with a totally different game plan. So I've seen NA do at so many international tournaments. Whereas in my opinion, it's like all those great coach quotes go, like, you're supposed to play the way you practice. So whatever you did in practice, like, it's too late now. You can't rehaul your whole game in the middle of a match now. You got to just do whatever you practiced. So in my opinion, like, you look at like the really great junglers. I even think of some of the ones that were in NA that were really good, like Smithy, Meteos. Half of what makes these guys good had nothing to do with like them not being on their strongest champion, being ahead in the game. Like with Meteos, I remember someone made this point years ago, and I couldn't unsee it once he said it. It happened in so many games. Like this guy would literally just change his path in like super early in the game, like just almost intuitively in the response to what the other jungler did. Like, that's fucking insanely hard. If people don't know, you don't just make up your path on the split spot like that. Like, you go in with a game plan of what you want to do, and this guy could just easily on the fly do it, which suggests to me his comfort must be unreal when what to normally would throw you off happens. And then the other angle is, like, it's someone like Smithy. How many fucking games did this guy still win when he was behind in the jungle? I always tell people this. Listen, everyone's dreaming of the scenario where you get your pick that you like, a matchup you like, you get ahead, your lanes are all ahead. At that point, you almost can't make the wrong decision. Like, you just don't make optimal decisions. How about a game where there is no lane to gank, where you're just behind the other guys and they got all the objective content? Like, these are the scenarios you can't train the guy that. Like, it takes a lot of experience to get to that level, in my opinion. So, like, here's the thing, I don't necessarily hate it for like smaller teams. This is why, in my opinion, the Fnatic one's the big gamble, because they're also in theory trying to be a contender and doing a fucking crazy move. Like, SK was borderline playoff team anyway. Like what? To them, I don't agree with it, but I can sort of see why they might fuck around and do something stupid. The Fnatic one's the one that's a killer to me, because no matter how good you think Whippo is, that's not the question. The question is there a jungler in Europe who doesn't play an LEC who's better than Whippo? The answer's got to be yes. It's got to be. Like, the answer cannot be no. He is not like the fucking 10th best jungler in Europe, is he? Like, he's never even played the role. So, do you have any thoughts on this? Do you have any comeback to any of that?
I actually think it's like, I mean, the issue that I see with it now, it's partially obviously about the contending part for Fnatic, right? Like, it's part of the issue. I do think there are better junglers outside of the LEC right now. I mean, we have one popular example who got kicked for whatever reason. I don't know. Something must have happened behind the scenes. Like, Gillis is,
of course.
Gillis is 100% one of the at least top 5 junglers, probably top 4 junglers in EU right now. Like, when I looked at the split, the impact he had, even if he was led by Abedaga or whatever it is, if there were kind of internal issues, like, this guy still put his money where his mouth is, and he was clutch. He actually did the things he had to do, and he didn't mind forcing. I see Bwipo maybe being able to compete for the top 5, but I guess the precedent that it sets is like the overarching issue. It's like, I mean, I already talked about this a bit, but it's also about like, what are you telling your fans? What are you telling your fans, right? Like, we can't come up with anything better, like any better idea right now than putting Bwipo in the jungle. Maybe one thing, but it's also like how, like, as you said, right? The smaller teams could get away with it, the bigger teams cannot, because it's such. I feel it's unprofessional to the point where it's like you legitimately like force someone into a different role or bring someone into a different role without even considering the other options that he could. And then you're like, hey, we're going to stick with this. And this is like what we're going to do right now, right? Like, it feels unprofessional because you wouldn't consider this in most other circumstances with the amount of preparation time you have, right? You only have 3 weeks to prepare, and suddenly you put someone in a different role. If this was an off-season, like Perks and Caps, like, this is a respectful approach to the game and to the role, I guess. I mean, more or less to the game, actually. Then you tell them, hey, you have like 3 months to prepare right now, get your 80k ready. And we saw what happened to Perks when he started out as an 80k, right, in 2019. He actually sucked for half of the split, even if the full split, and then kind of kept like increasing his value, became better towards like playoffs and then MSI. And this guy may be the GOAT in EU, right?
Yes.
And what it treats the GOAT of EU, is Bwipo a GOAT of EU? You're putting these people in the same night as these people, but you're giving them less time preparing, which is like inherently disingenuous towards the game and towards the role itself.
But that's also something I think is really important, right? If you look at the perk situation, you got Caps, who's like the number one mid laner at that point, right? He was amazing. And then you get Perks, who's also good he was doing it already in solo queue from what I know. He was already good at AD carry, or decent at least, right? But the thing is, with Breepo, I actually consider Breepo one of the best tops in Europe right now. I think he's really, really good.
Sure.
And why is he changing? You don't need to change Breepo, and he's that good. And who are they going to get to replace him? And is he going to be the best jungler? I don't think so. As you said, the Gilius, he's really good. I even think Trinkets is good, who is getting replaced from SK Gaming.
Yeah, I mean, either one that has some kind of experience, and like I was made fun of this for talking about experience, because like, I mean, experience may not matter because like seasons change, whatever it is. Like,
sure.
This is complete BS. And what I mean by the BS, like, if you have encountered, like, the league is a cyclical game. Like, patches come and go. At some point, you're gonna encounter something you have encountered before. You can rely on prior knowledge, which is basically experience is prior knowledge, basically. So, and you can rely on that and re-bring that, right? What can, for example, someone like Breepo, who has now played that role, come off of? He has no prior experience. Even if he has like experience as a whole, he doesn't have prior experience in that role, right? And the same for obviously Treat. So it's like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I guess I'm getting kind of worked up over this, because the more I think about it, the more mad it actually makes me. Even if the Breepo example is maybe not the most fair one, because I do think that he's great, as an individual player, not actually in his role only, but he's a great individual player. But just overall, the lack of decency people show towards how serious I believe like any role should be taken, because we wouldn't do the same thing for any other role. It's not like you put the jungler into the AD carry and you'll be like, hey, this guy has knowledge and mechanics, so he must be good on AD carry. That doesn't happen, right? Like, even if the jungle role is easy, every other role, people have knowledge about it and understand the roles, but they don't understand the specifics, and we treat them with more respect than we do for the jungle role.
Oh, I also had another point. I forgot to mention this one actually earlier, but this was based on what Wickd said about like the fact that at the moment, you just respond to the laners. I can see why as a laner you'd say that, mate, but this is a point I think Dom has made that I think is actually like, it should literally be like a rule of the jungle. It's like at the pro level, a pro level jungler has to be the man who can say no. He has to know which laner to say, like, I'm not coming to fix your wave right now. It's going to fuck the whole, like, my path will be done. I can't fix it anyway. You fucked it. Like, basically, the problem is, in theory, I agree. Like, right now, if all the laners, like, essentially, if they could all telepathically understand, like, it's actually you who needs it more now. Yeah, you tell him. Then, yeah, it'd be fine. The jungler could just follow you. But as far as I can tell, in, like, pro play, half the game of being a jungler is knowing when you be selfish, when you can be unselfish, when you have to be, like, to actually save the game, you have to tell someone no, even though in the short term, they do need help for some reason. Like, that feels like that's like half of the fucking battle these junglers have. Like, a lot of the times you notice when they kick junglers, they don't say the guy's bad. They just say, we had different visions of the game or some bullshit. Like, that's half of what it is as far as I can tell.
I agree with that to some extent. What I mean more is that the laners saying what they need to do is more like, we need help, I need help to push this out. And then the jungler can be like, I'm coming in 30 seconds or 60 seconds or like 90 seconds, or I can't come at all, right? Sure. I think right now, most of the time you can pre-plan it due to how simple the meta is right now with the champions. And that's also why I said earlier, all the champions you play right now are just very simple, but once it changes, everything is going to change completely. And the junglers that are coming in, like Tweets and so on, I think are going to suffer completely. I don't see them playing a good Kha'Zix and invading junglers that actually need to make difficult decisions. Because I think Rumble, I played the champion, I don't think you ever need to make a difficult decision with this champion.
No, you just know whether or not you win 1v1, I guess. And if you do win 1v1, you contest the crap, right? And you just ask for help from laners. Like, I mean, yeah, I don't think that decision making per se is that hard. It's more, it's definitely, it becomes harder. As you said, like with carry junglers, it also becomes harder when like certain matchups change on the lanes. Like right now, the meta, I feel like it's really simplified. Like, you don't really have to play around top lane unless you have to fix a wave. Bot lane, you kind of like make plays with Leona, but it's Leona and Nautilus, but it's mostly if they roam off of the lanes that you kind of make plays onto mid lane and translate that into other roads, right? So it's like the meta feels simple right now, but it's also due to the entire game state. It's not just the jungle, right? It's everything that kind of leads to it. So it's multifaceted, and I don't know. Like, I think if bot lane becomes more explosive and people have to play more for 3-3s, like then, like for example, the experience that we talked about, like in terms of like for example, the jungle, you have to give up more than in order to be bottom more often, that kind of thing. That kind of balance will be lost, and I think if the decision making in any kind of sense becomes more difficult, then everyone that has not played jungle before, especially in seasons 4 to 8, honestly, will be struggling, because that's basically what we're going to reverse towards. Because season 9 and 10 and 11 have been kind of similar. Just season 8 and before have been different in terms of like how the jungle is treated and how the jungle is viewed.
Fair enough. Okay, right. We'll move. Actually, that was like a Wickd one because I thought this was quite a good one. Actually, it's the kind of topic I like to bring up on shows because I like to get sort of like a bit abstract. Like I like to talk. As I know it sounds boring to like plebs, but I actually like to talk about how we think about the game and how we discuss the game because in doing so, you actually I think sometimes level up discussions. It makes you realise like the patterns you've fallen into. So one that Wickd brought up, it's a classic one, but I think it's a good one. But it's got a lot of sort of grey area we can get into. It's basically the idea that when we talk about teams, it's the same with players. Like so, the player version of this, by the way, as an example, would be let's take jungler for example, because since a role like jungle can be so varied in like what there is to do in the game, what you have to do for your specific team, it's very easy. So, for example, last year to say Shadow is one of the best junglers in the West, but it's like, what does that really mean though? Because at the end of the year, I'm pretty sure a lot of us just thought actually he was just a fucking amazing Lee Sin player who had some issues on a lot of the other champions, and quite frankly, I don't think it's a coincidence that like no one's heard of him since then. Like something obviously, but even his own team don't seem to really bring him up. So it feels like no matter how good he was on Lee Sin, was he actually as good as a jungler? Like maybe what would define him as a jungler there? What is the best? Like what is the situation? So similarly, Wickid's angle was whenever people talk about teams, they will just label them super simplistically. Like for example, let's use the classic G2 team. G2 has amazing mid-game macro, but then they just leave it at that, right? They leave it super vague, which, listen, if you're having a very quick conversation like Twitter, I get why people do it. But your kind of point here, Wickd, was that actually, if anything, that's just like the starter where you should be having the discussion, right? Not the end. It shouldn't end at like, this team has amazing mid-game macro. It should be like, well, first of all, what the fuck do you mean by mid-game macro? So presumably then you mean like, dragon control or the way they rotate through lanes. Like, open the topic up with Wickd. This is the sort of lines you're on, right?
So my problem is I feel like a lot of people don't have the understanding of what actually happens, like the small details that leads to things happening. And then they just catch onto a catchphrase like, oh, this team is great macro. Like a really good example here is NA. So everybody's like, oh, NA sucks macro, ping is not an issue, they have nothing to do with it, their macro is terrible. I'm just looking, dude, they bring over Korean coaches, European coaches, European players, they have almost full EU teams or imports. How can their macro suck if EU macro is good? Like it doesn't make any sense, right? So I feel like people just look at the game very simplistic or they don't understand it. And then they try and sound smart by putting in a buzzword and be like, oh, the macro is better this team. That's why they're losing.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a thing, but I think it's kind of perpetrated by Twitter, obviously, because you have like little to no interaction. But it's also that I think people make it easy on themselves when they talk about these things, and it's really hard to kind of understand like the intrinsics of it unless you have been part of it. So they cannot discuss it in buzzwords. If you've been part of any kind of system, right? If you've been part of any kind of League of Legends team at the highest level, at least, you cannot know that like macro is like. You don't really lose these words yourself. You don't really use these words. Even tempo is something like people didn't use until it became like a buzzword that even coaches used in season 7 or something like that. So it's not something that people actually talk about. What they talk about is like, hey, so we have a move right now. We can do this. Like I have X amount of time to make this movement. Can we do something? Like these are the kinds of discussions you have. Or you just talk about, hey, we 4-1. If you have like established waves, synergize them, that kind of stuff. So you actually talk about the more detailed things than ever talking about the abstract kind of things. And I think in the discussions, when you think about it on Twitter, and then I also think that on partially like some talk shows, obviously, people try to sound, as you said, smarter, and they don't want to get into the details because the details could prove them wrong. That's what it is.
Like pretty much like, and also the thing is like, I think League of Legends is so complicated to actually talk about the details would take a lot of time because you have to be watching the game at the moment. You have to be like, this top laner didn't push fast enough. He played a little bit wrong in the 1v1. And now the jungler screwed over because he couldn't push or he couldn't beat up the enemy top laner, which he's supposed to do. And those details you don't even see in the broadcast, right? Because they're just showing one player at a time. You can't see the top laner or the bot laner and know what's going on. Only the teams can know that because they're trying to communicate. And even they don't know it perfectly because they're watching at different positions.
Yeah. By the way, just because I want to get a bit more in on like what Wickd meant on his example before then, right? When you say that, so actually you opened up like an interesting angle there, which is something I've always asked, but my version of it was like this, Wickd. Instead of macro, I always used to just say it for like 1-3-1. Like, it's one thing if in the past they were like, that's just not how NA plays, TSM, CLD, they like the team fight. That works in like season 2 and season 3, mate. It doesn't make any sense as you're alluding to here. Like, we've had literally some of the best European solo laners go to NA and they still don't fucking 1-3-1 on side lane. We've had, so like, as you you say there've been Korean coaches that have been like champions in Korea who've come over to NA and been coaches, even had success internationally. But that means there's something about the mentality they have towards macro, basically. And you can go more deep if you want. Something's a disconnect there. So how would you relate it to the example you were setting up there, Wickd? Like, instead of saying they have bad macro, how would you prefer they break it down? Like, they just don't understand positioning, or do they have some problem with shot calling? What are you thinking of as a better way to sort of state it?
So this is honestly what I think. I think NA players or people that play in NA, due to ping and due to other things, are simply bad individually compared to other regions, right? And the problem in League of Legends is when you get behind, it becomes extremely hard to play the game. If you're ahead, it's super easy. You know what to do. You know how to win at all times. And you look great. You look amazing because you're ahead, right? But when you're behind, you're always going to look bad. And people are going to be like, oh, why did they lose? Well, this guy got caught or the macro sucked is generally what happened, right? And that's generally what people talk about.
Okay.
I think it's deeper than that. I think the inherent issue with an A, I mean, at least like in terms of the macro kind of stuff that you just alluded to, is that in an A, and at least from my experience, it's that people understand the basic concept, right, of 4-1, right? And 4-1 just means you put 4 people on one lane, one guy on the other lane, right? Yes. And then you push and you kind of synergize the waves. And whether or not he has to rotate, you have to decide, or whether you rotate into him, you decide. Like usually you end up with a 5-0 at some point, right? In a 4-1 situation. So that's a normal thing. So when we talk about new standards, we kind of have this view of like, okay, 4-1, this is the basic concept that we think about. But in EU, because of like the quality of players, I would say, obviously because like new strategies are being developed, like people are more aggressive, people are more individually confident, maybe that's actually the reason for it. Is that people kind of know, okay, we are 4-1, but we have to position slightly differently in order to make this more and more efficient. So even if the basic concept is understood by the NA teams, they don't test, or they don't get tested on these little things, right? What if, for example, we mispush this wave slightly? In EU, if you do that, bam, you get engaged upon, you fucking die. In an A, that's not tested upon, so they don't get engaged on. They don't actually have that kind of like test coming in, so they don't become really efficient at it because they don't really try to like perfectionize these kind of like play styles, and like whether it's 1-4 or 1-3-1. So they never get tested enough, and thus they stay at this very basic level of macro understanding that even if they bring in over coaches, like some of the players will just never pick up, or they kind of regress to the point where suddenly, like even if they're advanced like strategies, suddenly they don't get tested on these advanced strategies, so they return to a more basic kind of understanding of it.
Because I have a take on this. I want to see where you guys want to go with this. Just pick up on any part that you find interesting. But obviously, on all the talk shows I've done, because every year, basically, I've done like different talk shows with different people. I try to get as many different guests as I can. One thing I find really infuriating is people never, ever come to the obvious conclusion to me, which is there is some sort of breakdown with the coaching structure. Because as we pointed out, some of these coaches have even been in EU or been in Korea and been in regions where they can do all the things we're talking about. It can't just be that, like, these guys aren't telling their players. But I've noticed, because coaches are very careful about saying, like, my player's an idiot and doesn't understand something, what they do instead, basically, is they tend, if they talk about NA, to say things like, people don't like to be criticised, or, maybe they're like a little bit entitled, like, they think, well, I'm a good player, why are you coaching me that way? Like, just coach the general things. But the reason why that doesn't really work for me is, like, at the end of the day, in theory, that means the org is fucked up, in my opinion. Either the coach is, like, basically a coward and won't really coach the game the way he thinks it should be done, in which case I actually think you've invalidated your own job, or the org doesn't give you the power, which is what they're implying there, like, oh, I have to sort of keep these star players happy, or if the wrong ones go to the org, I get fired. In which case, the org is fucking up. Because the problem I have is this, right? It's a point I made in a video recently. I noticed some people got it, but some people didn't. Which is, I noticed whenever Doublelift, because of his own career and how it went, if you think about his career, right, the chances when he had the best chances to compete against Koreans, for example, were very early, because that was when the gap was incredibly small, right? So I noticed Doublelift sort of projects his own career onto everyone else in League. And what he always says is, he talks as though, like, well, NA's behind. I'm doing like air quotes when I say that. They're behind, and so why would you ever expect them to be able to beat Korea and LPL? Like, they're always going to be behind. But the reason why I don't get that logic, to me, is because to me it implies, like, he thinks of League, as far as I can tell, as though it was like doing like a course in school, right? So you start on book 1 and you work through that, and let's say the guy who's advanced, he's on book 5, but we're on book 2 at the moment because we're in like second year or something, right? In his world, you have to actually go through all 5 books and catch up to where that guy is on number 5, or he's always ahead of you, in air quotes, right? The problem problem I have is this. That doesn't actually seem to be at all the way League of Legends works. Like in League of Legends, every single year, literally, I see a team with a bunch of rookies in LPL or LCK just instantly become like a top 5 team in the world and sometimes contend for worlds, as the Sunning team did last year. Like they had like basically 1-2 veteran players. That was it. The rest were like basically people who weren't even on the LPL radar a couple of years ago. So that says to me it can't be about being behind. Like those guys didn't like go to some advanced double-lift course and get through all the 5 books. What that suggests to me is if you're properly coached, these principles can be implanted in people who don't even have experience competitively. So what do you think on this angle? Because to me, that's why there has to be some sort of a breakdown here. Like I feel as though it's no way that these are all idiot coaches. These guys definitely know better than this.
So I think the big misconception people make on rookies is a lot of these rookies that are called rookies have played League for a very long time. They actually have a lot of experience with League of Legends. They might just not have it at the highest level. And I think coaching those people, if they're good mechanical and have the right attitude, is relatively simple, as you said. Like as you said, they have book 1 read already, maybe book 2, and then they skip book 3 and 4 and go straight to 5 because they don't need that, right?
Yes.
I completely agree with that, and I think you're right on that. And I don't think NA is necessarily behind at all. Like, people said the same about EU, and then we almost won, right? And we won MSI a couple of years ago. And everyone's like, EU will never compete again. EU is going to suck. The West is terrible forever. And I don't see it like that at all. What I see is NA is practicing in an inferior environment, and they can never, or it's extremely difficult for them to compete, because they're just practicing in an inferior way to EU and Korea, because we have much better solo queue, right? And if one of your practices is already ruined, then you're going to have a difficult time.
But you're a coach, so you must have some take on this, Amazing.
I mean, I don't think that I necessarily have like a coach perspective on it. Like, I mean, I can only talk from experience of all NA, because like I have 2 very different, distinct like experiences. You know, one was being coached everything by Reggie and Loco, and them telling me I'm an idiot and I don't know how to play the game. They literally taught me every single day, which I actually embraced at some point. And they were right about by just watching Korea, and they basically brought in all the Korean principles over to NA. Whereas, like, for example, one of these, like, even if Polly was like really trying, I guess that's kind of what you're alluding to, that the coaching structure broke down, where it felt like even if he tried as hard as possible, even if he tried like whatever it is, it just didn't get through to the players. And maybe it's just like fatigue. As soon as people come to NA, they kind of like relax and eat their burgers all day. But that's at least not my experience. It's more about that they become fatigued in a way that they don't really, even if they want to understand these concepts, it's so hard for them to get like proper practice upon them. So they feel like it's not worth it to practice them at all, because they don't get practice on them in a quality sense, right? So it breaks down because the lessons learned are not really able to be translated properly, like for weeks at a time. At some point, especially when you're screaming like the bad teams, the worst teams, it just breaks down because you just don't care about them anymore, because you beat them anyway, right? So I think that's more like it, that it's a matter of quality opponents making you just perform worse. I would say if, like, let's say the top 2 teams, let's say TL and I know C9 would just practice against one another, the entire split would actually have like a similar thing to what happened when we had like Origin and Fnatic pushing one another, or CRG and EU and Moscow 5 back in the days, right? You actually elevate that without trying to implement the rest of the competition. So I think it's maybe just increasing the quality of the practice by isolating one another, and it's been like, hey, we're going to be a practice partner, but we're going to make one another better for words and for our region and not for ourselves, you know?
I think one really dangerous thing about doing that, which I noticed when we were in Korea, one team did that. I don't remember which it was, but a team did that. They don't really learn all the concepts, and they might get stuck in what's called biases, right? Where like, oh, this works all the time for these 2 teams, and then suddenly get exposed to something new and it doesn't work anymore. I think it would be great to have 3 or 4 teams maybe that did that, and then you have different playstyles and so on, of course. Then it would work. But I think 2 teams is just enough. I think it was Samsung Blue or something that did it with Samsung White, and Samsung White actually scrimmed everyone else, and Samsung Blue only scrimmed Samsung White, I believe, or something like that.
Oh, no, you're meaning Frost and Blaze from back in the day, where Frost used to secretly not scrim, and then Blaze would do the scrims and then pretend to be that team for them or some shit like that. I know the one you're referring to there, the story from back in the day. Like, the problem with that scenario is, like, I actually do think, in theory, that would be a good approach. This is the point that they haven't managed to figure out yet. And it's basically one of the things that will always fuck teams when in a region where you have to compete, which is they won't work together. So to me, the obvious approach is like a compromise of kind of what you're saying there, actually, Amazing, which is what you would do is, let's say say you have, like, let's throw like TSM and like maybe if they get the shit together, 100 Thieves. Let's say you had 4 decent rosters in NA, right? The ideal scenario would be you all get together and go, look, in the short term, we all can't go to Worlds, so someone's going to lose out here, and someone might like want to battle each other short term and gain advantage. But in the long run, if we want to actually any of us do anything at Worlds, our practice is going to be better, right? And what the obvious conclusion would be like, right, not only will we mainly just practice each other, but we'll also sort of give and take in the practice. Like in this practice, I'll play a certain way you want me to play for an opponent you've got coming up, and I'll kind of like how boxing people fight, if you know, like you bring someone in to mimic that style. It's not going to be as good, but you just want to mimic that style. Basically, the idea is you wouldn't only play your style, because I do agree with what Wickd says. From the stories I've heard, it's happened in Counter-Strike as well, where you had 2 teams who thought they were ahead of everyone, so they only practiced each other. The problem becomes, sometimes all you're doing if you only play your normal style is you're just training yourself how to beat that one team amazingly. You might not beat anyone else doing that, And the classic example would be, I think the League of Legends one people always reference is, that's the whole reason supposedly why that Immortals team that Dylan Falco coached, where they had like Hooney and Rainover, did that infamous thing where they had the Lucian top. It's because I think it was like CLG or someone, whoever it was that they were scrimming basically on the other side of the bracket, just actually couldn't do anything against that. And so they thought they had like the most OP shit ever. But then when they came to actually play it, they were like, actually, it doesn't work at all, because we weren't playing this team in scrims. I think it was TSM or something they played. I can't remember who it was. But yeah, basically, that's like an example where you thought you'd like discover, you had the main line to the next level, but it actually ended up being useless. One way I want to tie this back in though is, to me, one of the reasons why it cannot be that the knowledge doesn't sort of get over the Atlantic Ocean in the example Wickd gave. The reason why I know that can't be the case is because right now people obviously are going to reference Cloud9 because of MSI, right? And be like, look, they didn't understand simple concepts, right? The problem there, boys, is the strategic coach of Cloud9 is Mithy, who is literally one of the players you would pick from the West, who has time and time again been able to figure out like sort of how do you boil down the current game state to whatever like the way to play the game is, and then communicate it to his teammates. So the idea he just went to America and forgot all that, there's no way. That suggests to me, again, there's something breaks down with like how the players think of the game or what they're willing to implement in the game. Because I think personally, to tie it back into the practice angle, I don't want to hear any more of this bullshit angle from coaches of like, yeah, but to keep my job, I've got to beat Team X on Saturday. It's like, bro, if you want to beat Team X, just become a better team in general anyway, and that will happen. Like maybe it'll happen 2 weeks from now, but the point is, the better you are at the fundamentals of the game, you are going to naturally become a better team anyway. You shouldn't be tunneling on the next team. Like, in my opinion, you should work on what you're doing to get better, and then maybe in the draft you specify some things about that team, but I feel like they've overblown the idea of like you have to win this week's game to keep your job or something.
Yeah, they definitely have, and I agree with that. I actually just thought about something, and I think that that may explain it. So, to a certain extent, I think that in NA, and I think that's very different to EU, and I think we've kind of had this in EU now developing, but it's still not to the same extent as NA. Is that in NA you have head coach, you have strategic coach, whatever it is, and then you have assistant coach, and you have another assistant coach. You have like 4 to 5 coaches.
Yes, they're getting bigger staff. Yes.
Yeah. So because of the staff is so spread out, the players are also widely spread out, because each one of them is going to get like different opinions and like going to have multiple cooks basically like ruining the soup, whatever it is, right? Because like they keep getting input about certain things in the game that may not be as important as like the actual like macro thing that they have to figure out, whether that's like the 4-1 scenario, 1-3-1, whatever it is. So they keep getting spread further and further apart, because all their like they get input. So while this sounds like really good that you get a lot of input from different people and they may even be qualified, what it means though is that like your honestly your capacity at some point is reached, and you're not going to be able to focus on like the 1 or 2 isolated things that actually make your team like a lot better than, let's say, like the individual things that you may be able to implement like on your own if you just really tried, right? I've seen this, and I saw this slightly in one of these. It was like not really that explained, and I understood the implication of it, and I understood why, for example, the assistant coach did it, is that he really tried hard to make FakeOut at the time like better, because FakeOut wasn't as able to lane against the top tier players as other people were. That it made sense, right? He was a rookie, so he had to kind of be brought up to par. But him being isolated and kind of like having that thing in his head, like made him overly focused on that. So suddenly those macro aspects kind of got lost on him. We had this as a team discussion. So it felt like at certain points he was over-focusing on that, couldn't focus on that. So like bringing the two together was pretty hard. In EU, I feel like the people are a lot more self-reliant, and they are a lot more, they're given a lot more agency in who they are and how they act, right? They are allowed to express like whoever they are in terms of their play style, and the people are kind of catered to that. But the overarching concepts that the coaches are just teaching are the ones that are supposed to be the macro kind of things, right? That you have to like learn as a team and kind of get the same vocabulary going for, right? So I think that may be the main difference between EU and NA, which is why some of the NA teams actually struggle, even though they have 15 coaches at hand.
That actually makes a lot of sense to me. So one thing I've been thinking about, if I had to make my own coaching structure, I think you need one coach who's the leader who like controls everything, right? Like the puppet master.
A manager slash head coach, yeah.
And then I think you should have 5 extra coaches for each individual lane. And these needs to be super high elo players on the ladder, solo queue people. And their job is not to focus on anything past the laning phase. Their job is only help the player pick up a new champion. If you're like, oh, this champion is really OP top lane now, I need to pick it up. How do I pick it up the fastest? How do I play it? And so on. And then help him in the laning phase and how to play the champion, right? Those kind of things I think could be really beneficial, but I think having multiple coaches for the macro and other stuff just doesn't make sense because you're moving in different directions, as you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that working, especially if you just isolate these 5 coaches, whatever's, and have them be talk to the players individually, which I can agree with. But I don't think they should ever partake in the team discussions. They shouldn't be there. The players should kind of bring the knowledge that they've learned from whatever coach they're working with individually, kind of bring them in team concept and kind of establish themselves as who they are, right? I mean, it works sometimes. For example, TL is a team that is really able to bring in the macro knowledge or like whatever is 1v1, 1-4 knowledge like, specified into the game because they have an in-game leader. They have people that are cerebral enough to do that, especially J being that person and Jensen being in that system forever now too, right? And TSM has had this with Bjergsen too, which is why they lost a lot of advantage by giving up Bjergsen, I guess. And like other teams have had it at certain points, but it's basically just been Bjergsen and J to a certain extent over the years, you know? So any other team that is trying to like replicate whatever they're doing is doing a disservice to their players because they're capping them at that very level that like TSM and TL has established because they're not building up anything individually. They're just doing the same system that these teams have already established and hoping that it's going to work out the same way, right? And they don't have the players or they don't cater to the individual players as much. So they become like copies of whatever top teams are doing.
Basically, obviously, I noticed this is one area where there's like a massive philosophical difference in the community right now. People like, I mean, Monty, I know, for example, is on the other side of this. People like Monty think you shouldn't bother complaining about the ping angle. Like, he thinks, because to him, he looks at the game and he says that, no, there's like fundamental, like, basically knowledge or decision-making things is what's fucking the game up for you. Like, you know, you don't correctly take the Herald or you don't do something proper with the Baron or you didn't understand this dragon setup. So to him, he looks at that and he's like, right, that's just about understanding the game. But I know that a lot of people who are players, especially former players, think that actually just the fact that you have to practice on such high solo queue ping, etc., is a massive limiting factor when you contrast it to, I mean, the obvious examples like Korea, where, you know, if you live in Seoul, you basically play on like 8 ping and it's just like basically may as well be LAN. Like, in fact, if anyone's seen Nemesis' stream recently, one of the reasons he also looks way better is he is playing on like fucking 8 ping versus whatever he played on in EU West, you know. He's essentially got a 3 times faster connection or something. Like, it's going to look better. Right? What's your take on this then, Wickd? Like, is that the camp you're in essentially? Like, basically, if the ping's too high, like, it's just going to make even the basic practice and mechanics and stuff worse.
So the problem I have the high ping, right, is you get used to playing matchups wrong and you get used to playing things wrong because you can't push it to the limit. Let's say you're playing against a Malphite, right, and you're 100% confident as an 80 carry player, I'll always flash this ability. Then you add 60 ping on top of that, you're like, I can maybe flash it a little bit further away, right? So you can't go in and do auto attacks, and you can't go in and be as aggressive as possible at all times. For example, let's say you're playing Lucian, you know, like, I can probably E this ability, I can just jump away. You won't be able to make those plays that are to the limit. And I think one key player that did this really well, and Mason will probably agree, Forgiven was a player that was actually really good at pushing to the limit and going all the way into the limit. And you try to catch this guy, and you just flash away at the last second, and he just gets away. And I remember I did reaction time test with Forgiven because I'm really fast myself, reaction time. And he had something ridiculous in reaction time. I was like, this is actually crazy. Like, how is it so low? I think it's 150 or something.
Yeah,
if people don't know, by the way, I can confirm that one of the main things about it's why I've always said, right, one of the two other players who are my favourites, and people wonder why I don't criticise these guys because I've done it a million times privately. Like, you know, both. It's Forgiven and Froggen. I can tell you one of the problems with trying to argue with these guys is they're not just guys who are just doing stuff randomly. Like, they have like the best arguments ever for why they did shit in the game. Like, they can always come up with an angle as to why, like, and they always have like some specialist knowledge. So in Forgiven's case, you're absolutely right. If you ever ask fast forgiven in a team fight. Like, why didn't you just go a little bit more aggressively? You could have killed this guy here. Like, even without having the VOD up, he can just tell you, oh, in that scenario, like, if I step like one step forwards, like this other guy gets a CC on me and I die, like, I have to actually like move back. Like, he was always right. I've went back and looked at loads of the examples. Like, basically, like, that was like one area he had mastered, mate. It was like, he was always like, it's like the meme of what you'd tell a player to do, but obviously no one can just consciously think of this. Like, step one step into their range to hit them and then out so that after you would open them and hit you. But it's a million times harder to do it in the game, obviously.
Yeah, it's definitely like that. Like, some people are like that, but you can talk about more if you want.
No, but like the thing is, right, when you can't do those plays, you just slowly fall behind. You can't get the poke in that you want early in the team fight. You're going to look a little bit weaker. Maybe you lack 2 abilities in pre-team fight, which you could have gotten in if you practiced on a lower ping scenario. And then maybe that small detail would change the fight. I actually think a lot of people talking about NA being behind. But C9, I don't think they look that bad. I think C9 had probably top 2 bot lane at MSI. The bottom was really strong. I think Blabber had some shaky moments, but if he had more support from his team, if his team had won lanes a little bit harder or been a little bit further ahead, I think the entire MSI would look completely different for C9.
The only thing that worries me though is that like people take this ping excuse and they kind of try to excuse other things with it, right?
Yes.
I mean, to kind of give you a historic kind of like reference, like when we were with Origin the first half year of the 2015 year, right? Like we were obviously in the Canada scene, but we kind of developed it as a team. We were actually playing on 80 ping because we were playing from Tenerife. Like what this meant is obviously we're not gonna be as individual proficient, but we still practice and we still relatively held high elo. Like I think Niels was like, or Sven was like 1k LP, I was like 700 LP, and the rest was also really high LP, right? And that was with 80 ping, 60 to 80 ping, right? But what we came really good at is just understanding the macro sense of what we had to do, right? So our plays were really cohesive, they were really proficient, and they were just well developed because we argued about those more so than anything else. And I think you can't quite excuse like the ping and use that as an excuse for anything else, because that's circumstances everyone else is playing under, right? So everyone else is playing under the high ping. Obviously, the matchups are not going to be played to the perfect amount, but that doesn't take away from what you have to do as a team and understanding like what kind of like when you have 1-4 and when you have to 1-4, how to group, how to position properly. Like that's still inherently there, right? Like you're just gonna play as slightly slower, I would say. That's basically the thing.
So I agree with that take, but I think there's a massive difference between being one of the best teams or being the absolute best team in the world, right? If you want to be the number 1 team in the world, I think it matters a lot. If you want to be decent in Europe or in NA, then I don't think it really matters that much. I completely agree with you, because other aspects of the game also matters. And in NA, everyone is playing high ping, right? So at that point, it doesn't matter at all for the regional performances.
No, I definitely agree. Like if you obviously want to beat Korea, beat China, like you have to play on a low ping, and you have to really push your matchups to the limit. You have to play. And again, this is a kind of concept that I've also talked about, that I think when you play to playoffs and we play to like really important matches, like your average doesn't matter. If your average is great enough, and if your average is great enough to be the best team in the world, yeah, that's great. Like then you have 5 fakers on your team. But in the usual cases, you just have to play to your perfect level in order to beat any of those Korean or Chinese teams. Otherwise, you just lose. Like, because they will push your matchups every single time. They will skill check you every single time they can. If you're worse than them, they screw you. You can't do anything about it, and you suddenly get give up early game leads that you would usually not give up. So you have to play to the perfect level if you want to beat those best teams in the world. So I agree with you on that one, yeah.
Should be more active on social media and kind of don't let, basically what you can, I'll set it up for you and you can take it from here. Basically, I got the feeling it's like you kind of agree with me. It's like instead of like 2 years after you've been a coach complaining like, oh, these bloody Reddit narratives are out of control and everyone thinks X, Y, and Z about my players. Well, I mean, the obvious answer is what I would say, like, you're allowed to talk as well. Like, you can join in if you want, maybe. Be part of the conversation, like, explain why they are or aren't those things. So that's kind of like what you were alluding to, right? Give us your thoughts on this, Amazing. In what way should coaches be more involved, or what would the benefits be?
So I think the first thing is obviously like standing up for your players, or like kind of like giving reference to your team. I think that's maybe the most important thing, because when I see it with teams, like a lot of like times, I don't see the managers / the coaches stepping up for the players. Like if my player is being criticized unfairly, right? If it's any one of my team, like I will step in for that. I will tell them, hey, this is why this is happening. For example, the DOS standing situation was obviously difficult for us, like, and if I think about last year, I kind of tried to defend it to a certain extent and just talked about it a bit. And you invited me on that show too, so I could talk about it. But it's like, That's something that people should always do, just to defend and kind of give reference and kind of give like some kind of input on the team, right? Especially if you're the one that is making the decisions and you have the responsibility. So any head coach should probably publicly make more appearances and just talk about what's happening in the team, why they're struggling, why they're in a position of like why they're doing well right now, why they're doing badly right now, whatever it is, like, and especially when they're doing badly. But the second one, I think I thought about this when I saw your your show with Youngbuck, or the two shows with Youngbuck, is that Youngbuck, I mean, while he's a 6-star general, he's as dumb as it sounds, people don't understand like what he brings to the table, because they only know from the narratives that other people have created for him,
Yes,
like what kind of value he supposedly have, right? And I do think that if he was more able to just talk about him, just go, for example, like, this is what I do in a day, right? Let's say he makes a YouTube channel, or he like creates a short video with his team, and he just goes through day. This is what I do throughout the day. Then maybe people get more reference on what he's actually doing, what his work is, right? What his role is, even if it's just small excerpts. Because we see this with basketball coaches partially, where, I mean, we have so many storylines about like Greg Popovich, we have so many storylines about like Phil Jackson due to how vocal his players were, but also due to how vocal he has been through his books, especially Phil Jackson, throughout his interviews, how he kind of like puts some quotes out there.
Yes.
And I think coaches should do the same, right? Like, kind of challenge the popular narrative. And if you let others decide your narrative, then you should not be able to complain anymore 2 years or 3 years afterwards, because you're the one that let it rip, right? You're the one that let it be. And I guess the third point, and I think that's maybe the last point, is that the popular narrative in terms of like how to analyze coaches is maybe the thing that annoys me the most. And I think that's maybe the thing that I reflected upon the most, where I see coaches. Okay, so what do you expect a coach to do? What do you expect a coach to do? So right now, the popular narrative, and this may be partially due to hot takes, is that if the draft is good and if the macro is good, that's basically it, right? Like, that's what I hear 24/7. It's fucking annoying. Like, it's fucking annoying. What a coach is supposed to do is part of that, right? Organize the draft. But even that is like not really always the case, right? It's depending on how the team functions. In Origin, our coach didn't need to really structure the draft. We did it ourselves. He just needed to give us input on what the other teams were playing, right? So we kind of like organized that. And the same was kind of, I mean, yeah, it was happening in other teams before that too. So it's like that happens sometimes, but draft is not always the best indicator to know if the coach is good. Neither is macro, because you don't know how smart the players are, and you don't know how smart the players are in terms of like utilizing draft that he created, right? So you may have specific ideas. So there's so many other things to coaching that people have to kind of bring into the limelight again and kind of talk about. And coaches have to step up for that if they don't want to be fucking criticized through that metric. Like, if you don't do that, like, you obviously allow that discussion to be led into that direction 24/7. So you have no agency anymore. Your value is decided upon by others, and that's your fault at that point.
I mean,
think,
I
Wickd?
agree with that. Like, one thing, if you ask me what does a coach do, and if I just look at people and you say, what does Youngbuck do? I'll be like, I have no idea. I have no idea what he does for the team. Maybe he does zero. Maybe he sits in his asshole, and maybe he's working 24/7, telling his team, we need to pick up this champion, this is how you do it, and blah, blah, blah. Like, we have no idea what the coaches do. Like, straight up nothing.
Yeah, and people kind of responded to me on Twitter, and like, I think it was Matthew who said, like, it feels useless to go like really deep on the strategy side of the game. You don't have to be like really talking about the strategy side of the game like in depth in order to lead the conversation elsewhere, right? You can, for example, say, we decided upon this draft because it was best suited for our players at the very time. That gives you a lot of like, that is a lot of saying something, but it's also saying a lot of nothing. But it's at least like good information to kind of bring out and kind of say, okay, we may not be able to pick up certain of those, like, we may not be able to pick up certain champions or whatever it is, or we're not able to like do certain things because of our limitations. You know, you can say this after a season, for example. You can say this even if you feel comfortable in your spot right now and you know you're going to improve, right? That's perfectly fine. So it's like people just have to speak up more and kind of bring more to the scene if they do want to like be seen as something more than just like someone that is like, oh, I'm gonna pick Copma on 5. Like, it's so useless. It's so useless because that's not what coaching is, and especially to my experience. Even though I was a strategic coach, like, in my opinion, like, I mean, I'm at heart more a head coach in terms of my approach to the game, in terms of how I act, because I think the psychological side is a lot more important, and I think the overarching team chemistry is a lot more important than anything else. But it's like, I was judged by our drafts and our success basically because I didn't speak up at the time. And I think the same happened for my head coach, and the same happened for other head coaches in the league, right? Like, speak up, say what do you think is like should be your focus, and have your focus be the basis of evaluation for the teams that you're working on.
Also, I feel like when it comes to draft, it's mostly the coach, including all the players, right? So it's like a 6-man job. It's not really like, oh, you do it, coach, and we just do whatever you tell us to. But one thing I think you pointed out that's really important is you said you mainly focus on chemistry of the team, and I agree with that 100%. I think there's certain players in certain teams, I'll just give an example here, Ocelot and Snoopy. Those two players were really good at making everybody else play better and perform at a higher level, right? And you need to have those key members in the team that keeps the atmosphere good, hyping up people. Like Ocelot is an absolute hype man. Before games and so on, he was just trying to get everyone happy, everyone confident, and everyone's feeling good. And I think when people are feeling good, they play so much better. Like, it's not even close.
Yeah, no, that's my experience too. Like, I mean, that's I guess how I kind of like created how my career laid on when my individual ability declined a bit, especially towards season 7, season 8, and season 9. Then, right, like when I was in Schalke, I was not the best mechanical player. Like, I'm gonna be honest here, I was maybe top 5 in my role, top 6, but it's far away from my CW days where I could just murder everyone on Lee Sin. Like, it's obviously slightly different, But what people, and that's like what people have to do, and I have to understand is that, like, maybe us picking, like, let's say Sejani 7 out of 10 games was maybe not the best draft, but for us it was the best draft because it made a lot of sense right at the time. Because like, it made me the most comfortable, it allowed the team to function best. So even if that draft on paper may have been subpar at times, like, it's still the right decision by Andre, by my coach at the time, to actually make that decision and tell me, hey, go play Sejani, or me to make that call to play Sejani, right? And I think people lose that nuance 24/7 about like focusing on like the hype behind certain picks, how important this pick is, how important that pick is, how important that pick is. R5 do this, R1 you're not allowed to do this. Who sets these arbitrary rules? It's just a matter of opinion in the moment, and it's not something that is adherent to like the differences in teams and differences in players. It's like it's too optimistic. It's not real. It's just fake in a sense, right?
Yes, but yeah, go on.
I think a big thing is also when it comes to drafting like that and people saying those things is like they want to look like they're right so they can never concede a point, right? And this is just one thing I'm going to mention LS quickly. I think it's ridiculous. He said Renekton is bad for 2 years. He's got nerfed now and he's still top pick at MSI, right? The thing is, drafting, I feel like most people don't understand it 100%, or nobody does, right? There's so many small details that can change everything. And you see at MSI, Rom was super rated in the beginning as well, and then he kind of fell down a little bit. He was the number 1 picked in the beginning and banned, and now he was third, I think, after Morgana and Yude, because those rose to prominence during the tournament as people got better at the game, right? I think drafting is extremely complicated. It depends on the players, it depends on the champions, and it's also very difficult to see which draft is actually better because a lot of drafts are close to even, and then you're like, oh, I have to choose that one or that one because you don't want to seem wrong.
Yeah, and you also have to like kind of understand the certain situation you put yourself in, right? I mean, I obviously try to like always think about like what I did throughout my career, and I remember distinctively there was one series that I played, or like 2 series that I distinctively remember. There was one game against against LGD where we were just like, okay, give them XYZ, we're gonna take that, and that's just gonna be our combination to counter the comp that we expect them to play, right? The comp that we had, in every other sense would have been horrific, but it worked in that scenario, right? And the same thing happened when we played, for example, in HK in season 6 when we're kind of coming back as Origin, right? At the time, it was like we're 4th place in regular season. We play HK, we're 2nd seeded, and we play them, and we're just like game 4 and 5. We're like first pick Braum. Like it doesn't fucking matter what they play because we think this is like the best draft for ourselves in that very moment, and we'll counter them. Even if they could counter pick it, we would still win the game because we're so confident in that very moment. So is the draft bad? Objectively, potentially, but in effect, no, it isn't. It's fucking good. It's the right adaptation at the right time. You make the right call at the right time. You go against like what's popular within that moment, and you kind of break the habit. You break the habit at that very moment. And we see the same thing in every other sport, like in basketball too, where suddenly you have like matchups where, okay, let's say we're gonna play. I mean, the Spurs back in 2014, but that's like really specific references. Like played certain matchups completely different than any other team would at the time, right? They played way more small ball. They put a lot more emphasis on ball rotation, whereas people other than that, like, we're not going to do that because they understood, like, at that very moment, it broke the meta of the basketball to a certain extent, if that makes sense, So, like, you have to sometimes be able to make that call in that very moment, especially when it comes to best of 5 series or when it comes to specific games, and really counter what do you think is the assumption of what the enemy team is going to do.
Yeah, I'm probably going to do a whole video on the topic of like the whole thing, because I actually think, by the way, in general, unless you're just talking about for people to take things from pro play and use explicitly in solo queue, in my opinion, it doesn't even make sense to say things like, this is a good draft. They lost the draft. They won the draft. It's like, the question is, what were you trying to do in the game with those champions? So to me, the big flaw I see in that area of how people talk is when people make tier lists per role, so tier list of support champions, tier list of top, the problem with that is those tier lists cannot all exist at the same time. As in, your tier list implies that I should pick the S tier champion for top lane, the S tier champion for jungle, and the S tier champion for support if I can. But maybe those champions have no fucking synergy in the comp. Maybe you can't even make a comp out of those. So essentially, philosophically, I don't really get that angle, because it's actually basically an angle that implies just pick the best champions and then we'll make the comp after the fact. To me, one of the things I always thought was really good about MOBA games, basically, is that actually, in theory, strategically, a coherent comp beats better champions that aren't coherent, you know? Like, if I have 5 amazing champions that just don't work at all together, like, basically, I might win the lanes, but then what am I going to do from that, even if I do? Whereas there are comps which might not win any lanes, but might be amazing at certain points in the game. Hence, some of the scaling comps people rave about all the time. So I do think people have pushed that too far. And I also think, like, Mithy almost went like Strawman on that angle, because he was almost trying to imply that if you're a coach, you're going to give away things in the game that, you know, could hurt you, etc. I think it's pretty rare that we're really asking for that on talk shows. I think what we're really talking about is like you say the split ends. Say your team gets eliminated in 4th place and you were supposed to be like the second best team. Right, listen, once you've been eliminated, you're not really going to give away much by even talking about specifics of the draft. Like, it's going to be like 4 patches later before you play another fucking game. Like, you're not going to be MSI in that scenario. You know, you can give us some thoughts, and you're not really going to let much slip. But as like Amazing is alluding to here, the upside could actually be huge for you and your team. Like, if you can come up with, it doesn't have to be like an amazing one, just like a good answer. Like, you can come up with a reason as to why you did something. Dude, it's when you can't give people reasons that they come up with their own and just go really wacky off the wall. Like, it's one of the reasons why another area I think coaches should, what I call playing defense, like basically giving their side. I think another area it's really important is when they remove players or sub them in and out. Because if you say nothing there, you just have a vacuum that people will project all sorts of crazy ideas into, right? Is the guy toxic? Or was he just not able to play this champion? Or was it this key game he lost that he looked really, like, they could put any reason they want in there. And if that reason becomes popular, it might have never had any connection to reality, but it's just the reason now. Like, we all know the players that have the label of toxic, like that can last for like 5 years. That'll follow you around whether it was true or not. So, like, I think in that area you can do massive help for you. And actually, to just quickly allude to something Wickd said, here's another reason if you're a coach to do it. I think just for your own job safety, it can be massive. Yeah. If you look at the coaches that come off well on talk shows, they instantly, no joke, get like into the discussion for other teams to pick them up, whether that owner knew anything about what they did in the game. I think an obvious example, by the way, you referenced him earlier, would be like Peter Dunn. Peter Dunn already did impressive things building up Mad Lions, things he did coaching the region, but it was on talk shows, in my opinion, he really sold it, because he's so good at talking and having these great discussions and bringing in points you haven't thought of, that it's like he's just basically giving you an advert for how his brain works in the game. It doesn't matter what specific thing he was saying.
I actually also think he's really good as a coach, because I've been discussing some of the plays and so on in DMs, right, in private. And a lot of the things he says make sense. And sometimes it's things I wasn't even thinking about. I was like, oh, this went really bad. And why did it go bad? Because of that, right? But then he adds another objective concept to it. I'm like, oh, that's true as well. That could have happened too. And that's another thing that was a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a thing where, like, if you go more in depth, and especially as a coach, and like, I mean, what Thorin just said, like, it's more about how your brain works. It's just like, you don't have to like discuss every single thing, right? You just discuss one thing and you kind of give people a point of reference. Hey, this is how this guy thinks. This is how we can kind of implement it into our structure. And suddenly this person that you may have thought had no value to you suddenly has some kind of value in further discussions. So I don't know, like, it's a lot about playing defense. It's also about playing offense, and kind of like, because we see that some coaches actually get jobs just because they played good offense in a way that they kind of like elevated themselves beyond, like, through speeches, whatever it is that were kind of publicized, you know. Suddenly they're seen in a light, maybe in a savior light, and suddenly they get like hired for that, you know. So there's, I think if you wanna have job safety, I think it's the best way to do it to just be active on social media in some kind of sense, or at least like give talk show appearances, or have some kind of interviews running. Like, do something like that. Just talk, just be out there, show that you're a person, and show that you're responsible, right? Like to a certain extent, that's as dumb as it sounds, that's what most of the managements actually want out of you. They don't want the smartest, they don't want the best coach out there necessarily. They just want someone that is like able to fit within the narrative, whatever they're trying to build up, and then they utilize them, So it's like that the success can still follow, and obviously it's important, but it's success apparently, and that's what we've learned over the 3-4 years now, like ever since like franchising has happened. Success actually doesn't fucking matter for a lot of coaches, and what I mean by that is like even if they have success, they get kicked like 1 or 2 splits afterwards, simply because they had the one bad split. But the coaching structure didn't change. Nothing changed. It's just that they were unlucky. Something happened in the team, and they're gone. Like Polly is a good example, right? I mean, Polly was good season 6. He was good season 7. He was decent season 8. He actually brought one of these to where they were.
True.
And had a bad 2019. And suddenly he's like gone from the scene. Where is he?
Yes.
Like, I mean, he's one example, and I really like the person, even though I had my personal differences with him. Like, I still think that he's a viable coach for a lot of teams. So, like, do your own narrative, do something.
I'll even give you an example of one where I'm not, like, obviously I did it for Peter Dunn directly to big him up and show how he showed off his game knowledge. I'll give you one that's a little bit more controversial, because I was thinking of it when you gave that example. They're amazing. So I know, especially behind the scenes in esports, it's a super mixed bag how people feel about the current Fnatic coach, Yamato Cannon. Like, a lot of the people who I would describe as, like, the super nerds who are really knowledgeable about certain parts of the games, but I notice a lot of them, especially the ones who have an insecurity that they're not very good at talking themselves and they're not very suave, they hate him, dude. They think he's like a total fraud, because what they essentially do is they think it's kind of like the Weldon Green phenomenon, which is some of the way he presents himself is going to make people think he's better than he is, but that's not the same as him having nothing there. Essentially, he's a very good salesman for what his product is. Now, is his product the best? Maybe not, but it's definitely not. It doesn't have no value, though. Like, in that case, I think he does have some things he can bring to the team. In the case of Yamato Cannon, I think he'd certainly bring some elements. Like, for example, just the fact that he's so well spoken and does carry himself so well on shows. I could believe if players buy into that, it's a very good way to get people on the same page, thinking the same way, blah, blah, blah. But I think if you look over his career, it's actually a lot of his media stuff, I get the feeling, has kind of like put him in his positions to get his jobs and get the status he has in the community. Like, it's not, he hasn't come up with some like revolutionary thought in the same way some other people have, or his teams obviously in the game haven't done a lot of amazing things. So I'm not even saying that as a diss. I'm actually saying that again to point out that if you're a coach, depending on what your skill set is, this is how you establish your value. Like, what he did essentially was he got a lot of people in the scene to believe this guy sounds confident in what he's saying. He's very well spoken. He presents himself well. He can communicate eloquently. Like, these factors can play in your favor. Whether or not, I might bring in the biggest nerd ever who knows everything about every match. They might say, oh, it's nonsense or whatever, but like they're looking at something different there. Yeah.
No, I agree. Definitely.
Do you have any take on that, Wickd?
I don't really know, right? Because again, like the problem is, for me, I can't say if a coach is bad or not, because I feel like you have literally zero insight into what the coach does. So when it comes to Yamato Cannon, he does a lot of content, but I still have no idea what he does for the team. So you're saying he's selling himself, and that's just a bonus for him, right? Because he's not giving up any secrets at all, because I haven't been able to find anything, at least. Now, what's a lot of his content? I
mean, I think in his case, it's a lot about the untested value that he could bring, right? It's about like, because he have like less understanding of what he does, because of how he sells himself so well, he has an advantage over other coaches, right? The other coaches are as much of an unknown quantity as he is, but he has content out there or his face out there, so people think that he's responsible or can do some things, even if he may be worse than other coaches that are less outspoken, that are less well spoken, whatever it is, right? So it is a positive that will grant you jobs, because I mean, not just jobs, but it will grant you good opportunities. Because when you talk to the guy and when you actually see his whatever his career so far, I mean, Vitality obviously, he brought Splice to Worlds, which is obviously was a great feat at the time. There were a lot of things that were happening at the same time, like Origin, for example, failing. Then 2018, he brings Vitality to Worlds, and then obviously gets a Fnatic gig after getting a Korean gig. So it's like he has through what he did, partially through his success, obviously, but also through the ability to speak well, to actually get more and more opportunities out of it. Whereas other coaches that are unknown quantities, just after one bad split, they're booted and they're gone.
But also one quality I think he can bring and other coaches could bring is it can make the narrative around the players better, which means the players are going to feel better and they're going to feel more welcome in the team. And as we talked about earlier, team chemistry is really important and feeling good as a player is also really important, right? So creating positive narratives around your players is really important. Plus it makes you as a player feel like you're respected in the team.
I agree. No, I agree with that one, especially the respect part. Yeah, I think it's if you feel like you're part of a concept, you're part of a team, and you feel like everyone has your back, like you will play a lot better. As soon as you feel like someone in the team, whether that's coach or anyone that's not behind you, you already know they have 1 foot out the door. Like you just feel it, you know it.
And also, one thing I'll just say, wrap this topic and move to another one, is even though I totally understand, by the way, the Mithy approach, his approach, funnily enough, is what Korean coaches used to think. They actually used to, in the past, never want to do interviews, etc., because their logic was, why would I ever risk giving anything away to you? Like, if you don't know what I'm doing, good, like, keep it that way. But the flaw, in my opinion, if you do that, if you're a Westerner as well, is you actually essentially have to gamble giving away certain information to gain whatever you want to happen. So I'll give you an example, right? One case I actually thought where Youngbok, when he was actually coaching in Fnatic, did an amazing job playing defense for a player was when Caps left their team and went to G2 and they had the team with Nemesis and it just all collapsed immediately and they had to like build back. And obviously by the time the spring came, like the playoffs, they actually were a good team again. But, you know, they'd start out like, I don't know, whatever, 2-7 or something, really bad in the league, right? At the time, one of the players who was getting mega flamed was Bwipo, because just his style of play, naturally, like, he ints even in games he wins, or at least it looks like that if you're a fan. Now, what fans might not know is, if you actually listen to how Youngbok explained what Bwipo was doing, I remember him explaining on shows how there's times where basically Bwipo's job, no joke, would be like, right, level 3, you just have to run to bot lane and help fucking like Reckless and Hillesang like with a fucking gank. Now, basically, if you actually are clever and you understand what Youngbok's telling you there, he's actually essentially telling you, I have to have my top laner do the jungler's job. But he didn't say that overtly because that would be to flame Broxer and then Broxer would get all the hits. But he did it in a very clever way where on the one hand, he makes you not think that Whipple's just some moron, just move around the map for no reason. But at the same time, he doesn't explicitly say, Broxer can't gank bot lane at this time. Like, he actually found a way to sort of communicate. Like the gamble was worth it in that case because, like, Broxer's going to get flamed anyway if they lose the game. The question is there a way you can give Whipple some credit for something he did do? You know?
Yeah.
What my point, by the way, is it definitely takes subtlety, but I actually think like the rewards you can gain from it, I think you can turn a lot of narratives around. Or at a very minimum, you give people ammunition on your side to use. Like, say someone is a fan of your team and everyone on Reddit say one thing, they have an angle they can come in with that might sound plausible, you know, like, oh, but what is this player doing? Or is someone else making up for someone's flaw or something, you know, in the game? I think it's worth it in some senses.
Yeah, and it's actually not think about too, like if you give up certain things, right, about your team, right, even if you do you just expect that everyone else in the scene is stupid enough to not see it like themselves, right? That's also
True.
something I have to think about.
Yes.
Like, not everyone is an idiot. They kind of see like the issues they talk to your teammates to. Like, don't be so entitled to think that no one else can figure it out. You know, like that time is long past. You know, that used to be a thing. It's not a thing anymore.
I was actually on the fence about this, but I guess I agree with this now. I'm 100% convinced. I agree with that. I think coaches should be talking more.
What about...
I'm a good salesman. Nice.
Sure. So, okay, along those lines, though, you had an angle that you brought down on the list of topics here, Wickd, which is actually quite an interesting one. So there was a quote from Amazing here where it said, once your individual level is way above that of your teammates, it's about taking personal responsibility and trying to lift others up, figuring out solutions with them. If you can't do that, then you're not making it from a great player to an MVP type caliber player. Do you remember saying this, Amazing?
I do.
Right, so basically, this sounds like a very interesting topic here because it's also another one I've been trying to actually think about a lot in League of Legends. Like in the off-season, I made a video about this where basically I actually say that I think, basically the problem is, actually I'll give you a reference I did earlier. You know, like as I said last year, there was times in Mad Lions where Shadow did just look like the best jungler in LCS or LEC, looked fucking amazing. But actually when I look at him play overall, it's like, if you're the best, you can't just be the best of one champion. And then what beyond that? Like, beyond making amazing Lee Sin kicks, what did you do? And so my new way of describing it is, there's people who are really good today at a specific role in certain champions, right? There's one way you can specify it. But there's people who might not even be the best, like Xmithy's a great counterbalance. I don't think he's been the best individual jungler for fucking half a decade or something. But you put him in a lot of scenarios in the game, he just knows how to win the game. Yeah, he just knows what to do. So basically, I do feel as though we need a distinction between like good players and and then like whatever the extra quality that the other players, like the Perkses of the world, have. Because if you hear all the stories about them, it's not just their play. There's also elements about what they do that then like makes someone else better, like you're saying. So set it up for us, enemies. Like, what are you thinking of when you say this? Like the distinction between like great player to MVP. So MVP for real has to impact the other players, not just like the best player.
So I think it's better to kind of give player examples. Like I think Alfari is a great player, but I don't think he's an MVP. Like I think at least over the years that he has been in Europe, I think in NA may have been a bit different the split, but I think over the years that he's been in Europe, he has been great, but he has not been an MVP. Individually, whatever he does on the lanes, like in terms of like winning his matchup, playing his matchup to perfection, like he's great at that. Like he's actually maybe like he may be top 2, top 3 in Europe in that. You know, like whatever number you want to put on him. But I do think when it comes to the team aspect, like understanding when he has to move, like when he has to play for other people's advantages, maybe gives up some of his, like he doesn't quite understand that part. He will maximize his opportunities, but will not be able to translate to the team's success. And I do think over the years we've seen a lot of players like that have been really specific, as you put it, right, really specifically good at their role. They've been insane at the role. Sunday is a good example in NA.
Yes.
I mean, Afari is a good example in EU. I think Reckless over time was at certain point really that specific on the AD carry role.
Sure.
But even someone like I think let's think of junglers. Let's say someone like back in the days, Ku, Memento, even over a short period of time, right? Like these kind of players, like they were really good at the role, they're really good at the champs that they play, but they could never translate that to the team aspect because they didn't understand what it took to basically like. The intangibles, what it's actually about, right? Like it could be, for example, on an individual level. Like for me as a jungler, it's obviously a bit easier. Like what was told to me in TSM, for example, was like, hey, try to make your teammates better. Like do certain things for your teammates in order to lift them up, right? So that meant like I could AFK from the whole game and basically like pull have kind of the media's playstyle to a certain extent that he had in season 3, and just look at it individually and have like insane stats every game, go 7-1, but my team could have the potential to lose. But what I could instead do is just like increase the chance of winning by simply ensuring steps that my team was actually well prepared. So I talk about what the enemy jungler is doing. I talk about what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna look at the lanes individually, gonna sacrifice 1 or 2 camps in order to make that play happen. For example, from a mid lane to get like 2 to 3 creeps above the enemy, or like deny cannons, something like that. It's like these are things you can't quite measure, but they're so important. They actually make a real difference between people that are winning constantly and people that are not winning constantly. Mithy is a good example of like a player that was not as good individually over season 6, 7, and 8 and 9 potentially. I mean, season 6 he was still top tier, but season 7, 8, 9 he became worse individually. But he was still winning. He was still like a top tier player. Right? He was still making players better, right? So how do you measure that and how do you put that in perspective? And I think that's something you only notice and really know when you work with these people, right? Like, and there have been so many examples in other sports that I don't know why we're not basically making this applicable to esports as well, right? Or at least to League of Legends, because we have this already, like the discussion kind of in Counter-Strike partially, but we really don't have it in League of Legends where we talk about these intangibles, we talk about the shot calling aspect. We're trying to basically mechanicalize like the entire game, and that's just not how winning works. Like it's small sacrifices at certain times in order to get longer term like success. That's what it is in the end.
I completely agree with that. I actually have 2 examples myself of people I would consider MVPs, and one of them was never noticed, and the other one was pretty much noticed, right? So the first one I'll take is Froggen in season 2-ish, maybe season 3, something like that. He was really, really good, and the thing that was very important is when we were behind, it's so much harder to play the game, right? He often came up with like a small little strategy, like we can turn right now and then we can kill the entire enemy team, we can actually win this fight, or we can go hide in this bush over here and then pray to God and hope it works, right? And these things gave us good chance of actually coming back and winning games. We won a lot of games off those small little details. For example, one thing I remember is when you play Cassiopeia, he always had the perfect moments where we can turn right now. And then we turn and we win the fights, right? And we win the game of that. So I think that's a huge one where I'd like to give Froggen a lot of credit. Then
by the way, I just love the way that like Wickd just completely butchered Cassiopeia there. Like, just whatever. It's legit. I like it. By the way, I don't know if you know this actually, but apparently when I say Aurelia, you broke my brain on that Wickd like about 10 years ago, mate. Because apparently that's not how you're supposed to say the word, but like I'm stuck in your way of saying it now, mate. So it's too late. That ship sailed for me on that one. I'm fucked on that one. Well, what was the other example?
Other example who was never noticed in my opinion is Taps. Taps was the kind of guy that was super important for our team because because he was the guy who went in and fought first and did a ton of damage, right? That we needed to get those team fights going. We needed the kind of a given taps kind of player that goes in, does the damage, and makes us win the team fights, even though he often looks stupid because he died early or he got caught or something. He was a very, very valuable member that we didn't have. And then once we got Reckless, the problem was we have two passive players now. Like, Frog is somewhat the kind of player that's more passive, and then he sends you in like his little minion, and he watches you die while he does damage, right? And then Reckless is kind of the same, where we needed that one person who taps who could be in with us and do the early damage so Frog could do his perfect play, which was really working nicely for us.
I mean, I can give you two obvious contrasts because there's a good one there. Like at the time, Reckless was a better player at AD carry than Tabs, but as you say, the role Tabs was playing actually turned out to be vital for that team. I'll give you another example because I'll use another EU example. When they swapped out, obviously it was technically different players in between. I think Mickey X was in between, but obviously Ignar at one point was the Misfit support, wasn't he? And then years later, they got Gorilla. Now, on paper, if you're making a Hall of Fame, Ignar's never even gone in the Hall of Fame. Gorilla would instantly be in the Hall of Fame. He has like a first ballot resume. But the point is, if in those teams, Ignar is like a fucking engaged support and Gorilla is a passive fucking Janna player, you better not try and put him in a team where you need an engaged support or you shout a lot. It doesn't matter if one is technically better. That's why I think the whole better angle doesn't work in that sense. Because like, better in what way? You know what I mean? Like if I use a football example, because I know loads of Americans people who aren't from America rather, just get lost if I use NBA examples all the time. So I'll give people like a very quick example, in my opinion, of like the contrast here between being amazing at the role and being like potentially like the MVP of the whole team. I'll use like classic European midfielders, right? So one of the best British midfielders, at least when I used to watch soccer, was Frank Lampard, right? The Chelsea midfielder. And one of the things he was unusually good at was he used to score all the goals from midfield. So he would actually average like 20 goals a season as a midfielder. Now that sounds unreal, but in my opinion, if you contrast him with certain other midfielders who were scoring way less goals, I'll use an obvious one like Zidane, right? Zidane might score 6 goals. The difference is he'll also do like everything else in your team. Like, you know, he'll set up this player, he'll hold the ball, he'll be like he'll go back on defense, he'll do like a million things that don't show up on a stat sheet, basically. So basically, in that analogy, like Frank Lampard, I'm using the extreme example because he's obviously a brilliant player, but he's like the example of like Shadow on Lee Sin. He's just super epic at one thing, which isn't necessarily even everything about playing that role. Whereas in this case, we're talking about like, that would be like contrasting with fucking Score or something, where they were in his prime and like every jungle path's perfect and he always knows which lane to help. Like that, I can see why it's hard for fans to understand this premise we're discussing here, because again, they're just going to think if you're the best player, surely you are the MVP. But I kind of agree. Like, there's definitely certain roles and players. Alfari's a pretty good shout, actually, I think, amazing. Because I always thought the same thing. I always thought, listen, if the game was only about laning, he might be the best to ever come from a EU in that role. But the problem is the game is about so much more than just laning, let's be real.
No, it is. And there are a lot of other examples. And it's also just like, the more I think about it too, like the amount of players that we've gone through at certain times is that like we kind of like allow this narrative to kind of build up. And I think for some reason, ever since season 9, I think that's basically what franchising hit in EU, right? Like, I feel like that discussion has been mechanicalized. And what I mean by that is like, it's been focused on like how good is someone individually on his team, right? But you don't understand that's something people are now really discovering for some reason, like 3 years after franchising, is that, hey, you actually need someone that is leading the team. You actually need someone that is taking responsibility. You need someone that is like doing certain things that you as a coach, for example, or as management, are not able to implement into the team. This could be someone that's keeping your morale up. This could be someone that keeps your shot calling going, right? But certain things like that are necessary and needed for a lot of teams, and you can't always just expect like 5 great, like, unless you obviously you have like Samson White from season 4, you have SKT from season 3, like unless you assemble like a super team like that, don't expect to have the highest amount of success unless you get veteran leadership and someone who's keeping morale and just the little things like within those situations, like in the team, because you will fall flat. Like, you will fall flat because the example is not set, and the players will oftentimes lose their focus or lose certain things that they are supposed to have in these moments, you know. And I think that's really, really undervalued these days. MVP type players are still really, really important. And this doesn't even mean that they have to be like MVPs individually. This just can also mean that it may be a role player that like Wickd talked about earlier, right? Like someone like Ocelot or Snoopy. Maybe not quite like, I mean, Snoopy at certain times may have been a bit worse than you may want to, but he was still really good at the time, right? But there are other players that are not as individually like deficient, but they are still really good at the role, and they can give like give more to the team. And that's, for example, I see Gilius. As dumb as it sounds, I really praise this guy oftentimes because I've seen him be this individualistic player, and over time he has actually evolved to someone that I can respect as a team player that will sacrifice himself in order to make the team better. So why don't you want to have that on your team? Like, because of Reddit narratives, because of popular narratives, why would you not want that on your team? And that's what I don't understand about these days in terms of esports, that like so many teams are arguing against success. Actually, in its essence, they're arguing against success because they're like, oh, we don't want that guy. He brought success, but he's not the best individual. Like, what kind of metric do you want to go like have people be judged by? Like, if someone consistently brings success, like, why the fuck would you not want him? Oh, because XYZ.
I also think it's really hard to measure, right? Because like I'll give another example. If you take Holy Phoenix, you guys all know him, he played MSI, and then you take Forgiven, right? These are players that play bot lane in a super aggressive way, and they're really good at playing the game if they have jungle pressure, if they have the team help, right? But they're not the greatest at playing the game if the jungler is ignoring them and just playing around top side, right? So if you have a team around them, you generally want to have a top laner that's good at playing weak side. It also depends what does the team need when you're playing the game and what is the players good at that you already have.
Yes. Yeah, I actually think on the point you've just said there, Wickd, that's also another thing that kills me about the way like LEC teams are GMing. I won't name names for this one because I don't want to be mean to some rookies who are probably in a bad spot anyway. But you could probably guess some of the players I'm referring to if you watch the last LEC split. So one of the reasons why, it's like I said before, one of the reasons actually why I think like support and jungle are the most obvious role swap roles is because it's a way to keep someone who's really smart about the game, as you saw with the career of High, it's a way to keep them in the game even if they don't want to play a main laning role anymore. Meanwhile, I think those are the worst roles to bring rookies into who have only played, like, especially if they're true rookies, to distinguish from Wicked said. Like, obviously, it's different if they played 5 years of Challenger and loads of solo queue. And so, yeah, it's different. If they're a real rookie, though, like, another problem I have is this, right? I've seen players who played the ERLs, so I know why they got picked up. And in the ERL, what the team who was picking them up for LEC didn't think about was, in this team, they play around this, let's say, jungler, and he gets all his champions, and he fucking carries the game. You can't bring that guy into an LEC team unless you're going to build... listen, if he's self-made, yeah, do it. Build the whole team around him. But if you're going to bring him in to then be like a fucking Broxer-type jungler, like, your job is help the rest of the team. Just do what they say. Like, you've hired the wrong person for the job. Like, they've got the opposite skills to what you wanted. So in that case, if the case is like the Gilius example, that's what Gilius has done for the last... 2.5 years or something, basically ever since Vitality, for my money. He's just played his whole game around what like the mid laner needed or whatever, you know. Like, in that scenario, yeah, that's not about who's good on this champion in solo queue, is it? It's about what can you do for our team. I agree. Yeah.
I mean, even an example we talked about earlier was Breeper, right? I think Breeper is extremely talented, and he also showed that by going top 10, I think, in Korea, then went to Korea, right? But in a lot of their games, they don't do that well on Breeper because he doesn't get a lot of help from his teammates. He looks a lot worse than he is because he is made to look a lot worse while the team is looking a lot better because they're playing around those and they're giving resources to the teammates, which is also a massive benefit, right? Because now, you know, we can play around people, but we don't have to play around people. We can also play around the other members.
Actually, that whole thing is actually why some players are so overvalued and some players are so underrated. Like, it's actually the resource allocation and the things that they're made to do in a team, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, throughout the years, we've had a lot of examples of that where people were just like shunned by the community because they're put in unfavorable spots. Like, even SOAS to a certain extent in Season 9 Misfits, if I think about it, right? Like, that team was it was badly built, you know, but like he was made look a lot worse, and then you have the same in Immortals, right? Like SOAS, to my estimation, I don't know if he could still play at the top level, but if he didn't have those 2 years of like playing in teams that were misbuilt, he would probably still be a top tier player, right? Like, why wouldn't he, right? He played in the World's Finals, or at least like had a team there, right? So like that doesn't make any sense, and the same applies for so many other players that are in that same vein where, you put them in unfavorable spots and you suddenly expect them to be different. Like, I mean, I was a victim of that to a certain extent, even though I put myself in the situation with Schalke, right? Like, I put myself in a situation where I tried to like basically make the team better and sacrifice a lot of myself, but you know, then we didn't make it to Worlds or whatever it is, and then suddenly I get exchanged for someone that is mechanically better, right? But he doesn't have the same intangibles. What kind of thing are you telling the people, right? Then you're telling the people, we don't care about winning, we don't care about like your success. What we care about is like either we care about saving money, which is one thing, could be, or we care about like just like hoping for the best and like thinking that we're smarter than you, and that's probably the main thing. Actually, we're smarter than you. If we bring in a coach or whatever person we can have, we can unlock this guy and make this guy better than he ever was before. Dude, don't be lying to yourself. Just be honest. and just say it. Like you don't have any fucking idea what you're doing at certain times. And that's what a lot of GMs should just be saying at this point. You know, like they keep arguing against success. And they're like, we don't know what the fuck we're doing. We're just hoping for the best. Like that's what they're saying in a lot of the cases.
I agree with that. I also think a problem is there's no stability, right? Like every player, I feel like, especially NA, right, because of all the EU import, you're replaceable. We care about you. If you do one thing wrong or you look bad, we're replacing you. And I think it's bad because you don't have time to build anything up. You're not actually building something. It's understandable for me to change small things out, like just say this player doesn't actually work with the team. We need somebody who's better at these skill sets. Then that makes sense to me. But right now, it just feels like people just join this team, deleted, removed, and it's completely random at times.
Yeah, I mean, especially for rookies. I don't know why Riot hasn't stepped in at this point. I think rookies should at least be signed for 2 years. I think at this point in time, if I think about it, like, I mean, that's a whole different discussion. But like to just judge people by one split or even like by a couple of weeks, dude, please, man, like please, you know, like keep them on for 2 years. Be honest with them. And even if they end up on the bench, at least give them continuous chances to kind of reprove their value. But we see like players come and go after one split, 2 splits. What kind of message are we sending? Like, and that's like part of the issue with franchising too, right? Like that I've been criticizing all over again. That like you say it's a more stable environment, but honestly, it just gives the orcs more power. To be fair, to be completely fair, it gives the orcs more power to do whatever the fuck they want, right? If they don't want you anymore, they don't have to worry about relegations. They don't have to worry about it. If they don't want to paycheck, if they don't want to pay you anymore because you're being paid too much, well, next split they're gonna let you go, whatever it is, like, and that's basically what it is. So, like, I mean, those are small things, but it's something that's been
movement speed to be less. They have too much, not movement speed, but like jumps, right? I think they're thinking about nerfing Stridebreaker and Gale Force, but I don't know. But that's the obvious choices. Maybe Prowler's Claw.
Yes.
But I think mobility creep is something you can add to a lot of concepts in League of Legends, and it also removes strategic depth, I think. For example, you talked about the mobility the champions have. I feel like right now, when you split push in competitive and solo queue, it's very hard to go split push for second towers because everyone have almost infinite healing, and it's really easy for the enemy team to just run up to you extremely fast with the jumping plans, with the speed ups potentially, and go behind you. So often what people do is they just push the wave in and go to jungle camps or back off.
So as in they don't even try now to sort of like get the feel for you come in, they just say like, just don't even bother doing the calculation.
Like they don't even try and go for the towers because it's just not worth the risk in a lot of situations.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Like, I mean, what I've seen all the years now, like especially like this season, I guess is that like the strategic depth is more or less basically limited to do we fight or not. Like that's kind of what it is. It's like, do we want to fight? No, okay, so we back off. Like, and I think the nuance of League of Legends to a certain extent. While I do think it's become more, how to put this, like, it's become a bit more difficult, abstract to understand, like, what you have to do at certain moments. Like, I still think that it's the strategic value of, like, certain things has been lost. And I think that's, like, where I agree with you, I guess, where, I mean, for one through one doesn't even exist anymore. Right now, 1-3-1 does not really exist. Like, you only have 1-4, so you already have like half of the game of mid to late game strategies out of the window. Overloading on one side, which would be a 3-2 situation, like you don't really have in the game anymore. So you basically only have shifts or 1-4s. Like that's basically only all you have. So why would you want to have that? Like have that be the game when you had it so strategically diverse before? Why would you want that? And the only thing that, if I think about it, the more I see like the game, it becomes a lot more Call of Duty-like. You know, like you have you respawn, you go back to fighting, you die, you're like, oh, gotta try again, and like, 40 seconds, all right, next fight. You know, like it's like you keep skill checking as a team to a certain extent, not individually, but as a team, and whoever wins out. While it may not be the same thing at a pro level, like a pro level, it's still slightly more diverse. But that's definitely my experience in solo queue, where people don't think about this anymore. They just do the same thing all over again, and they keep checking until they win.
But I think that's mainly because of the meta, right? Like if you remember the past, you also had poke comms that were dedicated to just poking people out. You have healing comms, you had kite comms, you had a lot of different comms, then you had split push comms as well. But a lot of those don't work anymore because everyone does the same thing to a certain extent, right? Every single comp you pick right now is a teamfight comp. If you can't teamfight, it doesn't matter. And every single comp can 100-0 another champion. Where in the past, you had champions that actually relied on slowly choking people down.
Yeah, and we also don't have the strategic diversity in the early game, for example, to kind of back that up, right? Because we had this kind of same meta. Like, if you remember, like back in Season 4, we still had like slightly more diversity in how the comps worked, but you inherently still had teamfight comps a lot, like across the board. But you had like early game interactions, right? You had like, for example, like a team being really proficient at Fizz, for Fizz chase matchup, for whatever it is, right? Getting lane level 3, level 4, try to get that ahead. Suddenly the team fight comp just outmatch the other team fight comp because you got so marginally ahead, right? That doesn't quite happen anymore. People are just trading resources right now, and they're like, you get this, I get this. All right, one spike, I'm going to try something. Next spike, you have a spike, I'm going to leave it at that. And then next spike, I'm going to do something again. But it's not about individual outplay anymore in that kind of sense. It's not like I can do something at that very moment and just make a difference. We're still going to team fight at the end anyway. So it doesn't really matter if I'm 1k ahead, 2k ahead. It helps a bit, but it doesn't really make the amount of difference that you want to see to a certain extent.
Also, I think when you're talking about early game, it's not worth it in most cases to try and go for outplays because it's so dangerous to go for those outplays due to how strong support and jungle is on the map and due to how little advantage you actually get if you manage to kill the opponent. For example, if you kill the enemy top laner nowadays, oh, he died, he TP's back. He barely loses anything. He doesn't even care that much. Like, oh, he got 300 gold on a roll that's not very impactful, right? Where if you die, however, the jungler gets further ahead, the jungler is super happy, he soaks up some XP top as well, and now he's going to snowball super hard. So dying is more dangerous than getting the kill.
Yeah, to a certain extent, I agree with that. It's like, I mean, I still think there's early game interaction, so don't get me wrong, and I don't want anyone to quote me and be like, oh, amazing things, there's no early game interaction anymore. So he's actually going against his word. I still think there's early game interaction, but the nuance is different to what it used to be. It used to be about like, I'm going to outplay you, we're going to do something. But now it's like, it's slightly like timed differently. And what I mean by that is like, you have these specific timers where jungle differences exist, right? Clear speed difference exists, for example. Suddenly you have like 20 seconds more than the enemy has, for example, to get a grab or to walk behind someone. So you still have that, but it's not like, it's not an individual skill checking to that extent. It's more or less, do I have like in that very moment slightly more clear speed than you? So that the change has been made to basically, I get resources faster than you, so I have more time to make a play. Like that's basically what it is at this point in time, I feel.
I mean, I can even give a very good example for this. So if you take a Messiah, there was a play where Fudge outplayed Khan, and he solo killed him. It was Lee Sin versus Gangplank, I believe, or something like that. Lee Sin versus Jay, something, whatever. Bot lane. And this happened, and Fudge was, I think, 50% health after the play. It wasn't even close, right? He just walked up to him and killed him straight up. Back in the day, you had plays where Faker was super close to dying, made crazy outplays, flashes, dodging things, and that was praised, you know? I feel like outplays just don't happen to the same level, so even outplays that are very, very, like, not that cool or not that impressive get praised really hard nowadays.
Yeah, it feels like that the outplays that are happening are more or less like due to intrinsic game mechanics you can't change anything about, right? Like it's not like something like, for example, like the Udyr pathing, like okay, I get like more creeps, faster creeps than you, then I go my CDR boots, and then I'm gonna be that mobility creep to a certain extent that it's gonna run around the map and slap everyone in the face, right? Like you don't have the Lee Sin, Jarvan, Kha'Zix, like I mean Jarvan EQ flash in order to dodge a spell, that kind of stuff in order to make an outplay, right? Like the outplays have been like, I don't want to say cerebralized, but it's more or less like intrinsified to the game, and I think it's really different to what it used to be. It could be due to player quality too, but I think it's mainly because Riot has just overdone certain things, so the game has become both balanced and really balanced in some regions, but really unbalanced in other regions.
I don't think it's about player skill. A lot of people bring that all the time. But even if you look at LEC teams or NA teams, LCS teams or whatever, when the best teams are playing against the worst teams, you don't see absolutely crazy outplays either, right? Yeah. And there's big differences in the skill level between some of the players. And you also see players that you don't consider that great mechanically come in and do completely fine because it's not as important to be mechanically gifted anymore.
Yeah, put it this way, whenever I watched this recent MSI, and obviously, like, RNG had some games where they could have even lost to some of the nobody teams. Obviously, fucking Damwon literally did. Like, they were in a position where they almost lost to the Japanese team. Like, they were right in position to lose one of those games against Cloud9. They obviously could have lost both times to the Japanese team. Like, on paper, if you went back in time to, like, Season 5... a Korean team wouldn't just win that game. They would monster stomp every single player in the server. Like, they would go for the most ridiculous skill check outplay. Like, they would try and like every solo laner would try and solo kill the other guy. Like, that just doesn't happen now. Like, it's a bit like what happens in every game. Like, in my native game of Counter-Strike, it's not that, like, raw skill of the average player to the best player in the world is, like, massively reduced gap. It's more that people have played the game for so long that basic things mostly understood. So it's like even the average player knows how to look like he can do like 75% of what the best player can do. It's not that he can do it mechanically, but, you know, he knows like sort of like how things with the flow chart of how the game will go. Everyone understands that basically. Whereas there was way more room for that in the past. The area I, as like a boomer in League, get a bit tilted by the current meta is, even though everything now is skirmishing and team fighting, I actually find some of the team fighting less fun to watch as an observer, because one of the factors I used to really like about like the middle period of League, like season 4 to season 7, say, was that when you had a team fight, I could have like paused the game and I could say to someone I was watching it with, like, right, here's what we're going to look for. Like, let's look how this tank like zones on this point, and then, oh, let's see, can this burst mage get in and actually do the damage before they kill him, because these two players are going to try and CC him when he comes in. Right, you could sort of know as a player the rough like flow chart, like, here's what we need to do in this team fight to win, here's what we've got to avoid, right? People can say that I'm just complaining now. I don't think that's actually possible, except for the absolute best teams right now. Like, when I watch a lot of teams team fight, and I'm talking about like top teams in like Western regions, sometimes the team fight looks like even the players involved, they're just reacting. Like they can't possibly have a flow chart what's going to happen. Like, even back in the day, right, I used to joke, because it's true. You know when Jat, way back in the day, like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, made that series where he used to break down team fights, and he used to do a great job of it, by the way. You know, he'd have all the graphics showing you what ability they used. But even for those team fights, I used to say, as fun as it is to watch, the players definitely aren't thinking what he's thinking, because he's pausing the fucking game and going frame by frame, you know, like he's pausing it like, right, he making them all like John Wick, like, right, he calculated, a guy behind him was kicking, and he like, it's like, no, they just did all that off instinct. It's just that the game was a little bit more like on the rails back then. What do you think on this topic? Like, is that a boomer take, or do you find similar for team fights? Because I feel like they're super chaotic, and in my opinion, I don't really believe that like RNG knows what they're doing. I think they just go with it, man. I think they just embrace the chaos, as it were, you know.
I mean, one really easy example of this is if you look at MSI again, right? Look at a lot of the Yuda players. A lot of the Yuda players were thinking, yo, I'm going to walk in, I'm going to slap somebody, stun them, and then I'm going to start a fight. And then what happened? They blew up instantly. They just died. They just instantly died in a lot of the team fights, and nothing happened off it. I think the problem right now is there's so much damage that it's very difficult for a lot of champs to even start team fights. So you can't just waiting around, fight as somebody to mess up, or for you to just outstat check them.
Yeah, it's too much vision too at the same time. Like, you have so much information on the map right now. I think blue trinket, obviously, then you have like the water item by the support, then you have all the trinkets too. Like, it's the game right now is like, because both parties have so much knowledge about the basics, I guess, you know, like I consider vision a basic at this point, I suppose, because everyone can just put it up. It's that, like, because of that, like the higher value actually gets lost. And what I mean by that, because everyone is already at this elevated level of basics, like this outplay potential is not there anymore. Like, you don't quite have the main, like the mass amount of difference. So it's more about, hey, I'm going to do something, going to try, and in more cases than not, I'm going to be right because I am the better player. That's more like it than it is like, I'm going to make an outplay because I'm 100% sure I'm better than you. Like, that's a bit different than it used to be. Like, I remember in season 2 to 7 even, like, where if you're the better player, you couldn't make an outplay because you just had more knowledge about the game, but you also had more mechanics. You had both combined. Right now, I think both are kind of halted, but I think especially the knowledge part has kind of been equalized across the board to a certain extent, where the top players still have a bit more, but it's not the same difference as it used to be. And that's what Thorin just said. Like, the basics of League of Legends right now, even vision, even rotations to a certain extent, are kind of well understood by the public, right? And if they're well understood by the public, that means even the bottom tier teams kind of know the same things that the top tier teams do, but they just evolve slightly slower.
But I also think Riot streamlined the game more and made it easier, right? Like, nowadays you don't have to make decisions if you're gonna buy wards. You have blue trinkets, so you can just get vision.
True.
If you need to see Baron or you need to see dragons. If you need to go into a place and you don't have any vision, you just blue trinket and then you walk in, or you push mid and then you walk in afterwards once they have to respond, right? The problem is, I think having the decision to buy vision was really important, and I actually think it's much better than the current system. The only problem was that the support was just ending up having to buy all the wards, right? But that could have been solved in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think that vision may actually be the most important thing, because of like the information gathering that you sustain right now, right? There's no way on the map that you don't have vision right now. Like, if you want to, you can have a stalemate for 50 minutes. Like, if you just don't want to engage, you just play slowly. Sure, you have game-ending scenarios, right? You have the Elder Dragon and the second Elder Dragon, and the Dragon Soul, I guess. So you have 3 ending scenarios, but it's like, Nesha is not an ending scenario, like, anymore. Even just finding like the right fights is not necessarily an ending scenario anymore if people take it on the right time. So it's like, you have these definite right implemented ending scenarios, and those are the only things people play for nowadays. And it feels like that feels wrong. I think the decision making between getting vision and not having vision is maybe a way to kind of rebalance the game, because you put this in monetary resource, right? Like if I wonder if my economy is good, like I can buy more wards, or if I think my economy is good enough in the next couple of minutes, I will buy more wards, get more vision, and we're going to utilize that in order to increase my economy. And if I'm wrong about it, I pay a heavy price, right? So,
or even if you're behind, investing in going for wards in that scenario, like you might be able to make a play to get back in the game, or you might look like a dickhead because you do nothing.
Yeah.
It's a strategic choice, right?
Blue trinkets are the worst implementation ever. It just doesn't make sense. And also like that, when Dragon is dying and when Nash is dying. Why do you know this? Why do I know this? I don't want to know this, if that makes sense. It's like back in the days, it was, remember, like for example, season 4 or something like that, you played against some Korean team, it's like level 2 or 3, your jungler goes by the dragon is suddenly gone, you're like, what the fuck happened? Like you're like, okay, so he should have died in the last 30 seconds to 1 minute, I think. So I'm gonna try to time the next team fight, right? And if you're wrong about the timer, suddenly you lose another dragon. It's like, Jesus, like, okay, so what do you have to do instead, right? What was the conclusion? Okay, I have to get more vision at certain times, or I have to make more plays in order for me to get priors, in order to get vision. So you actually had an incentive to kind of replace the lack of knowledge with knowledge, right? Like nowadays, everything is so foretold. It's like,
I mean, it's even the red buff and blue buff, right?
Oh
it's
yeah,
kind of information as well.
On camps too, right?
Yes,
like you have time on it. Like all of this is so pre-told. Like people, even last year I said the same thing. People like kind of were like against it, whatever it is. But it's like, make the game less dumb. And I think we see a lot more cerebral aspects to the game kind of like become more part of the game again. Like especially the timers that don't make sense, and less ward coverage, or at least like no blue trinkets, because blue trinkets, what they're telling me is like, oh, I have a free Ash arrow every 90 seconds, whatever it is. Even have 2 people probably every 45 seconds on average, right? So it's like, do you really want that in the game? Like, why don't we have this kind of like dance, whatever it is, like, and like the fun aspect of League of Legends? The sad part is actually something we've seen in other sports too. That sports have become dumber in that sense.
Yes.
And I don't know if this is like a general thing that people are just like being spoon-fed, like idiots are like, here, just take this. It's like in the NBA we have the same thing. Actually, the game actually has become dumber, because like you have like I mean, this is like again like a weird example, but it's like the shot clock now is like 40 seconds. That's one thing, so it ups the pace obviously, so you have more opportunities to make plays. But it's also like that due to analytics and everything like that. Like you have just way more threes and way less skill expression at the very sense, because like people are just choosing from one of two shots. It's like threes or layups. So you have like no in between anymore. So it's like the same thing kind of applies in League of Legends. You have all of this, either you go all in or you do nothing, if that makes sense. Like you have like, and there's no in between. It's not like I do something and I do a bit there, but it's more like I go all in or do nothing. And I think that's a weird concept.
I also think the scrying orb, like I'm not sure if it's called scrying orb. The vision one, you can click on the plant, the vision plant. Yeah. I think that one's terrible, because everybody, you walk past it, you click on it, you're like, oh, there's a wall, great, I'm gonna clean it. Oh, there's no wall, well, I'm not gonna clean it. Like, it's so simple, you don't even think about it very much, because if you leave it open, most of the time the enemy team is gonna take it, so you have to click it.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, when I heard the discussions about like the scrying orb, and I heard the discussions about like the jump plans in season 5, it's like, because I was playtesting in season 4 at the end of it, and I was talking to some of the game developers at the time, and they were talking about jump plans. It's going to be a fun mechanic to add to the jungle. But what it did, for example, is like it killed the difference between junglers that had dashes and junglers that didn't have dashes. To a certain extent, that made sense, but it also made a lot of champions that would not, for example, right now be in the meta if that wasn't the case, right? Like, or a lot of champions would have less opportunity to be in the meta. So it's like it's like give and take to a certain extent, but it kind of killed the difference between certain champions and other champions, and that's what I don't like. Again, like you talked about this with Udyr to a certain example. Like Udyr wouldn't be dominant or that dominant if he could not, for example, basically go over wards whenever the fuck he wanted to, right? Like he has no downsides, in a lot less downsides in that regard. I don't want to say no downsides because I'm gonna get memed again, but it's like less downsides for that, So it's like, why do we kill off the differences between champions? Also, Gale Force, and you have the other item, Stridebreaker. Like, it's like everything feels so similar now that nothing feels that different anymore. And I think that's maybe the thing that annoys me the most about the game right now. Even though I like to play it, it's still annoying about that, because like champions don't feel like champions anymore. There's like this individual expression on the champion because every champion is the same, similar in that kind of sense? Or can we equalize through items, or is equalized through game mechanics to a certain extent?
I think even the strength between champs are similar, right? Like if you look at top lane, they're strong all game, like from the beginning of the game till the end of the game, pretty much. And same with mid and AD carry, where in the past it used to be top laners were really strong early, and AD carries were really strong late game, right?
Yes.
You have an AD carry get 5 items, you're like, yeah, I'm gonna get free shot now. This is gonna suck.
Yeah, I mean, and you have the same thing even across, like not just that. It's also like about champions that used to like have distinctive weaknesses and strengths. They keep trying to equalize that too. We see this slightly like with sometimes more than others, but it's like a lot of champions right now are able to sustain against Jace, like in the top lane, for example. It's like sometimes if you're like really fucking good at the champion, maybe you can get like a lead, whatever it is. But due to like biscuits, due to like whatever it's like the Thorin shield, then you have like the refillable potions. Like the difference between like playing Jace against a Maokai now or back then is like way different. It's way different. Yeah. It's like it's not the same anymore.
I'll even tie this back in because in my opinion, because whenever I look at how each of the roles complains about the game, I actually think the point I was making about how like chaotic a team fight is now, how about everyone does damage and everyone's doing fucking a million spells, and even worse, some of the champions just cycle through spells. They never bloody seem like anything's on cooldown. I think this is the reason why AD carries have complained so much the last few years. Because like I said about that example of Forgiven from years ago, they went into those team fights thinking like that is actually my skill. I'm supposed to be able to calculate exactly when I can do the damage, when I can't. Like I'm supposed to know which person's trying to CC me and therefore I have to dodge them or someone has to peel for me, right? The problem is they go into the fights now and even though they might be on the same champion they used to play, the targets they're fighting against are completely different and the premise of how the fight's going to be played is completely different. So they don't, I think what they're really complaining about is they don't understand like what is the perfect way to play this out, whereas before it was a bit more obvious. Like you knew based on like if you're, think about this, if the solo laners I'm playing against in a team fight is like fucking Orianna and Maokai, I can play that team fight very differently than if it's Echo and Akali. Like, one of those could be a nightmare depending on how they play. The other one's more obvious. Like, I know I'm going to play against them.
Yeah, it's yeah, you can go.
Okay.
Sorry.
I also think a problem with AD carry role is I think AD carry is really strong. It's been the whole time, and people are still complaining about it. But I think the problem isn't that it's strong or weak. I think the problem is it's miserable to play AD carry. Because you're the AD carry, you're super squishy, you don't do a lot more damage or have like a key goal that's yours. And then everyone is just trying to kill you all the time, right? So if you make one mistake or teammates don't protect you, then you just blow up and you die instantly, and you feel miserable playing the role.
Yeah, overall, it feels like in essence, and people can discuss this again, like, but it's like it feels like Riot Games has kind of done an attack on merit, and what I mean by that is like it feels like that the individual skill expression, especially when I see this with AD carries that get fed up with the game, right? It's not the same as it used to be. They can't express their individual ability the same thing. There are a lot more conditions that apply at the very same time, right?
Yes.
I have to rely on other things in order for me to be working well, and that's perfection has become relative. It's not perfection. XYZ is perfect. It's like I want to operate at 95% capacity most of the time, and that's going to be my best case scenario. That's more like it right now than it used to be. I achieve 100%, and I'm going to be the very best every single day.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I'd even say, just as a random aside, I'll even throw in there like a meta example, which is look at like the two champions which they had to like come along before AD carry stopped crying, which is like Aphelios, where the joke there is it's like finally the AD carry gets to feel what it's like for everyone else to be like, what the fuck does this champion even do right now? Like they got that feeling, and then the other one was Senna, and the joke there is don't worry about going in, just shoot from halfway across the map. Like, right, if those are your solutions to the problem, we've got bigger problems than I realised, guys. The symptoms are worse than the disease. What?
No, I agree. I agree. When I see Senna one-shotting anyone over the map, they're like, whatever.
Dude, when they made that champion, I was almost like, is Riot trolling? Like, do they need Reckless to win worlds really badly or something? They invented this champion just for him. Like, it's like they've tailor-made this shit. Like,
no, but it's also crazy. If you guys remember back in the day, right? Then I used to be on Aurelia main. They nerfed Aurelia because she had too much healing. That was their problem. They're like, she heals too much. And nowadays, every single champion in the game heals more than she ever did, right? You look at Gwen. Gwen is like really low on health. Ultimate, back to half health.
She's better. She's better than old school Aurelia, even like in terms of relative. Yeah, it's like it's insane. Yeah, I know.
Like literally every champion heals as much as Aurelia did in the past.
Yeah. Silas. Wow. Yeah, Silas. Like it's a non-targeted ability, even. Like it's a it's a targeted ability. I mean, it's a targeted ability. You can't miss it. Like you can't miss a heal. Like what the fuck is that? Like I mean, I'm not complaining about the game overall. It's just like certain things don't make sense over the course of probably the development cycle, but it's also probably because like there's been a change in in like how Riot has treated the game ever since I feel like Tencent has kind of like really taken a hold, you know? Like as dumb as it sounds, it feels like it has really been operating in a way that's more about getting as many people in as possible and kind of like have everyone partake in the game, everyone have fun to a certain extent. It's like, sure, that's good, but it's also bad for competitive play. And I think that's where I guess our differences lie in the very essence.
To me, it looks a lot like it changed when they changed balance designers, right? They changed it. They had Ghost Crawler for a while from World of Warcraft. That's when I think it started changing. Because back in the day, then they had Morello. I feel like he was very anti-healing. He hated sustain, he hated those kind of things. And then they got Ghost Crawler, who's the World of Warcraft guy. And he's very, very much healing. And I used to play World of Warcraft a lot, right? In Arena. And in Arena, it was literally like, you could not die. There were some patches where you could never end the game unless the opponent made a mistake. So you had arena battles that lasted for hours.
Yeah.
In 2v2 at least.
And wasn't the game also like some healer guy was just 24/7 doing spells on people just the whole time in like 3v3 or whatever? That was basically like half the game, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Right, I've got another topic, so I'll just do the last little commercial part. So if people don't know, obviously they do on DJ Esports have League of Legends related betting. Like at the time when this video should come out, I'm assuming it's going to come out on Sunday. On Monday, they've got like Superliga. So if that's the Spanish league, if people don't know, which has actually some of the best teams in. So actually they've got a rematch of the final as one of the matches there. It's a team called UCAM versus Cream Real Betis. That's actually the final of the spring LVP. They have the Challengers Uprising Season 3 tournament, which is like the American one with the academy teams like 100 Next and good Golden Guardians Academy if you want to see like NA teams, if you want to bet on those games. Right, one last topic I had that I thought we could do is some that'll relate a little bit to MSI. So one thing I want to actually ask you about, Wickd, is obviously the team that won MSI, Royal Never Give Up, one of the main storylines is the player who's really impressed everyone is the role swapped top laner, which is Xiao, the old mid laner, who, if people remember back in the day, because they were like the Uzi I team, he was doing the mid lane where it's like you don't even get all the resources. You just have like a fucking Oriana and you just better do your job and then the AD carry has to carry the game. He's role swapped to top, taking even some of the mage champions with him, and I think for a lot of people was like one of the standout players in the world this year. What do you think of this player? Because I wondered from a top laner's perspective how you see him, Wickd.
So I actually played against him in solo queue as well, and I thought he was really annoying because he's one of the few players that plays range top lanes. He picked Lulu against me, and he picked Jace against me, and those champions that are just constantly winning lane no matter what you do, and then he's getting really good at actually pressuring you and testing to the limits, right? I feel like a lot of people have gone into the sense where they're just going to play on Maokai, Malphite from last split, right? Or from 2 splits ago. And then a lot of people have lost the sense of how to really pressure when you're playing a ranged top laner. You even saw it MSI, then he placed Lucian against Fudge's Malphite, right? He completely destroyed Fudge, and Fudge was 2 levels down or 3 levels down at some point, and he lost both his towers in less than 10 minutes, I believe.
Yeah,
fair enough.
I mean, I think what surprised me about him is simply that like he got into the role, but he didn't play it like a traditional top laner. I think that's what it is. Mm-hmm. I think he really understood that like maybe bring those traditional values that people would expect out of the role, especially on RNG historically, would not be the best thing, but actually do what I think is right and more or less play to my own qualities as a mid laner, right? The mid laners, I mean, top laners may not want to hear this, but I think mid laners on average are just better players overall. Like I don't think this applies in every single scenario, but overall I would say it's more or less there because they have to play a myriad of champions. And I think a lot of top laners nowadays, they're a bit more specialized, I would say, than mid laners are. So him just bringing that expertise to the top lane, kind of like shaping things up, helped a bit. Even though individually he may not have been like the best, because there's definitely discussion about him being like second or third rather than first in that tournament, but I think at least for the role swap, and especially with the prep that he had, the time of prep he had, I think that was perfectly fine, yeah.
I think he's also another player, though, where we can use that thing that you were talking about before. Like, I put it this way, what you said at the end there about where does he rank? Like, I would say if you watch LPL, like, I think Nagori is like the best top laner. Like, it just looks obvious to me. Like, he's so fucking good at almost everything. But he's also just a traditional top laner. Like, he is the best at top lane. I think people like Xiao, who are also people where they're not just playing their role, they're playing to win the game, essentially. So, like, I thought, like, the way Xiao, for example, would, like, even start fights and stuff. It was some genius stuff he was doing there. And stuff that you're not necessarily expecting players to do. So, like, I'm always impressed impressed when people can bring something new to a role. Because think about it, there's a billion people trying to play that role, but a lot of people are going to be stuck inside like what they think the role should be, and they're not going to try other things. I want to actually ask Wickd about that, because obviously there was an area where immediately Xiao Hu brought something unique, which is he actually can obviously just play like an Orianna or something in top lane if he wants, whereas a lot of top laners would never have tried that, right? Basically, during the time period when actually the Western teams have had their sort of rise to have a chance at Worlds, is when we've had a massive amount of variety come into top lane, Wickd. Like before that, it really was like you'd have like 4 or 5 champions in competitive, and it was basically just based on your comp which you played. It wasn't even counter picks almost. It was like play X into Y, A into B, and it would be pretty obvious what the matchups would be. Not only did we get these huge champion pools, but we also came to a world where people are now trying stuff like flexing way more in the last few years between mid and top, or people tried playing mid lane champions in top instead to make it different, right? Do you think was this actually always possible in League, in your opinion, Wickd? Did people just not try it before?
I think it's always possible, right? I think every pro player have limited time to practice in each champion, which is also why when we talk about the coaching, I think every player should have their own coach that helps them pick up champions, right? And one example I can give is back in the day, me and Frog actually used to swap lanes. I often played mid lane for our team, where he played top lane because we had different specialties in our champions, and they would fit our team better in that regard. So I 100% think can play different champions. Also, Amazing talked about ranking the top lane. I think in MSI, the 2 best top laners was Kana and Xiao Hu. I think a lot of people have valued top laners very differently based on narratives, and not necessarily on how well they actually did. And I think if you really dig deep, I think those 2 will come out on top.
I will say one of the problems Khan will always face is that because in the past he's been on many teams that were like hyped to win Worlds or MSI and he didn't do it. People basically, because his team didn't win this one, they're going to assume he was just bad. I agree. I actually think he's a lot better this year than some of the past years he's been.
But one thing to also look at, right? If you look at Khan, when he picked Lee Sin, he carried the game completely. Yes. But then his team is like, yo, go on Sion duty, bro. You're Sion now. And like, what is he going to do? It's not like he gets the resource or he gets the opportunity to carry, right? So that's going back to what we talked about earlier. Did Khan actually have an opportunity to be a standout player, or was he just put there to survive and deal with what he needed to deal with while his team was supposed to carry?
Yes. Which, by the way, I've got to give him mad props for, because his old narrative was he can only play carries, and if you ask him to do anything except be the carry top lane, he's going to shit the bed. So if anything, you're right, I agree, Wickd. He was doing the exact opposite because presumably his team wanted it. Like, they are all Korean. I doubt he's just doing whatever he wants. Like, in that sense, he was basically sacrificing for his team. Spoiler, if you all think Canyon and Showmaker are like the best players in the world, they're supposed to carry those games. He's fucking giving them the resource at that point in time. So I agree. People definitely the problem with narratives is this. You have to be willing to change the narrative if the current facts don't meet it. You can't just go, right, well, the narrative's so cool, though, I'm just going to, make the facts fit it. You can't. You got to go the other way around. Like, people don't get this. I'm totally willing to change my narratives. Like, the one I always give, but people forget this because it's just too old now, is when Reckless was on that team they had in Season 7, where it wasn't that good, where they'd first got Caps and Broxer was, just brand new to the team, and Jesus was still playing before they had Hillesang. Dude, Reckless that season was nothing like the old Reckless. That was when he was just hard carrying the fucking games. The joke was he was playing like Forgiven, actually. It's like the one time he ever did it. I used to fucking love that shit. Like, in that scenario, the narrative shouldn't continue because the narrative didn't apply to that case. Now, later he went back. Now, if anything, he's closer to the narrative than ever. In G2, he's almost back to the old days of what I used to say, Season 5. So that's why people don't realise narratives are useful in the terms of, it's an interesting storyline, but it can't supersede reality. You got to go with reality as the number one fucking factor. Come on.
I completely agree. If you just look at Worlds with Reckless, right? Reckless played super aggressive. He was outskilling every bot lane, right, with his support. They were literally winning 2v2 almost every game and getting kills. In most games they played so well. I was really surprised.
I agree.
This video was kindly supported by Eddie, Chris with a K, Lager15, Pronogo, Shenlong, Zachary Carter, Adam Ox, Alexander Rao, Andreas Kroknes, Animosity, Dean Tanglis, ErikHillestad, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, Joseph Ginsberg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and as always, special thanks going out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Want to suggest topics or guests for my shows? Want to ask me questions in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers? Who are the upcoming guests? Maybe you want to be part of one of those discussions I do where we nerd out. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today by using the Patreon link in the description box below.